Hello everyone, I'm Mr. Night Story, and welcome to tonight's journey toward peaceful sleep. If you're enjoying this content, I would be so grateful if you could take a moment to like this video. I'd also love to hear from you. Please feel free to share in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. Your kind support truly helps me continue creating these relaxing experiences for you. Now please make yourself comfortable as we gently begin tonight's journey to restful sleep.
Rachel, my fiance, and I were on hour 17 into our drive to her family's cabin in northern Minnesota for a small vacation. I glanced at her with heavy eyelids to see that she was fast asleep in the passenger seat. The last 2 hours of the trip were spent through desolate back roads in towns that consisted of 100 people and a lone stoplight. I could feel myself immersing into the solitude. As the roads began to be labeled by numbers instead of names, finally, I turned onto the long stretch of road that winded through the forest and led to our destination, the cabin. Siri let me know there was 2 miles left. Then everything went back to silence. The car slowly trudged over the underdeveloped road as large chunks of gravel crunched and tumbled beneath the wheels while towering pine trees loomed above us, blocking out any stars. We arrived, and I was so exhausted that I considered just sleeping right there in the driveway. I'd never been to this cabin before, but upon first glance it was quite cozy. It's not one of those decked-out cabins that ridged people by, but it had 3 bedrooms and set just offshore to a small 100-acre lake. We quickly unloaded everything and collapsed onto a bed that smelled older than time. Though we were completely beat, we were excited to spend some time away from it all. The sun lit up our room early the next morning, and I was filled with a huge sense of relief when, out of routine, I checked my phone to see that there was no service. Nobody could bother us even if they tried. Rachel offered to drive to the nearest town to get some groceries, so I could settle in and check out the cabin myself. I rifled through hundreds of dusty books that sat on the shelves in the living room. Then I pulled out a dozen board games as I excitedly planned out our time ahead. I made my way outside and onto the dock that stretched out into the lake. A small boat lightly rocked in the water, and the dock creaked and groaned underneath my feet. I stared out at the lake, and finally felt the last of my anxiety dissipate. As the drive to town was around half an hour, I figured I would set out on the lake to do some fishing. A small island caught my eye that sat close to the middle of the water. It was maybe 100 yards in diameter and was filled with dense trees and shrubs. Something about it drew me toward it. I can't really describe it, but it's like it slowly sucked me in. The island had an almost eerie glow about it, like it wasn't really in the same world as ours. I anchored maybe 50 feet from the shore and started casting. It wasn't 30 seconds after that, I felt something hit my boat. I had nearly had whatever was on the line up to the boat. It must have gotten off the hook, I thought. Hit the boat before swimming away. When I reached down to reapply the bait, I saw a fish dangling off the end of the line still. An uneasy feeling washed over me when I saw that it was completely mangled. It was nearly ripped in half with tears all along what was left of its body. My first thought was that a bigger fish must have jumped on it, but I didn't feel any sort of struggle that would indicate such. Maybe an otter, I thought. But again, I didn't feel a struggle when I reeled it in. I tried to ignore this and moved on to the opposite side of the island, resuming my fishing. But again, the next thing I hooked suddenly stopped fighting. I pulled up another shredded fish carcass. This happened a few more times as I was just curious at this point as to what was happening. I looked toward the island and felt such dread, like the island itself had eyes and was staring me down. I slowly rowed myself away to another spot closer to the cabin and started to catch some actually intact fish, all the while taking brief glances at that island. After hauling in decent-sized base, I heard Rachel pull into the driveway. So I decided to make my way back and try to forget about this experience. Over dinner, I casually brought up the island to Rachel, so I saw there was this island in the middle of the lake. Have you ever been to it? I asked. Oh, that? Nah, my dad always just told us to not go over there. He said the land is still owned by the family of some woman who used to live there. She responded. Wait, someone used to live there? How? I asked. Yeah. He said that there was a woman who had a house there. She owned some knick-knack shop in town until around 50 years ago when she died. She'd have to row to the dock every morning just to get to her car. She explained. Must have been a pain in the butt to get groceries there, I said with a laugh. Yeah, my dad said she was super creepy, and they would sometimes catch her staring at them from the shore while they fished. She elaborated. Well, that's just weird, I said, kind of laughing it off. Yeah, but I'm pretty sure none of it was real. I think he just told us those things to keep us from going to the lake and messing around, she said with a laugh of her own. The rest of the day was spent playing various board games, reading, and just lounging around the cabin. However, each time I passed the living room window, I felt that distinct feeling of being watched. Each time I would glance out to see that island looming in the distance, curiosity was starting to nag at me, especially now that I was told that there was a house sitting by itself, probably untouched there for decades. A few days passed by and we spent our time doing more of the same. While relaxing like this was exactly what I needed. I couldn't get my mind off of that island. I had barely done any fishing since I did my first trip on the lake, as I always felt like something just didn't want me there. I couldn't take it anymore. I decided that once Rachel fell asleep, I was going to row out there to check it myself. It probably was just some urban legend her dad had concocted to scare the kids. But part of me wanted to know if it was real. Wanted it to be real. I sat up in bed reading, waiting for Rachel to fall asleep. She fell asleep faster than anybody I'd ever met and could sleep through a hurricane. So I knew I wouldn't have to wait too long. She really wasn't a fan of anything creepy, and going to an abandoned house in the middle of the night was not something she'd be interested in. But I did feel kind of bad doing this without telling her. Then again, I knew she would just protest if she knew. I grabbed my heavy-duty flashlight, a hunting knife just in case, and my phone to record anything noteworthy. Rachel was asleep within minutes of laying her head down, and after waiting maybe 20 just to be safe, I turned out the lights and quietly made my way out of the cabin. It was dead quiet outside as I made my way down to the dock. No frogs, no crickets, nothing making a sound that night. I pushed off the dock and rowed my way toward the island. Each dip of the oars into the water seemed so loud in the complete silence of the night. I was so anxious to see if Rachel's dad's stories were true or just legend. Either way, there was something off about this island, and I desperately wanted to see it for myself. I pulled up to it and circled around for a minute. The moon was bright enough for me to see the shoreline as I scanned for any spots that were clear enough for me to set anchor. Finally, I spotted a stump jutting out from the land that was partially submerged. The boat drifted towards it as I grabbed a hold and hoisted myself onto the land. I tied the rope to the stump, and after making sure it was secure, I clumsily stepped through the thick brush until I made my way onto what appeared to be someone's yard. I switched on my flashlight to see a disheveled home sitting in the very middle of the island. It stood 2 stories with rotting walls and a caved-in roof. No way, I thought to myself. There really is a house here. All of the windows were broken, and the entirety of the house was suffocated by an overgrowth of ancient vines. The trees were so dense around it that it blacked out the sky above as this house stood forgotten by time. I remembered to pull out my phone right then to capture anything I might find. I swept the beam of light over the house after I hit record. Then I made my way over. My feet crunched on fallen, dead branches and leaves. That sense of dread returned to me with a vengeance. I'd come this far, and I was not going to turn back now. I shined the light on the front door that set ajar. I shone the light through the openings where the windows used to be. It was eerie, to say the least. Whoever lived here really must have owned a knick-knack shop or something, because dozens of miscellaneous items were strewn across the floor, coated in years of thick dust. A box spring mattress looked as if it had been thrown across the room as it sat partially upright against a decaying wall. I put my weight into the door, and it agonizingly creaked open, letting out decades of neglect. The air was dense and unforgiving as I swept my phone all around to record all these long-forgotten memories. Dozens of various trinkets, household tools, and ceramic animals covered the floors as I carefully stepped over the abandoned piles. I shifted the light to one corner of the room and felt my heart jump, where I saw a pile of maybe a dozen baby dolls lying in a heap. I made my way towards them as the floor creaked and groaned. Was seriously starting to get the creeps as I noticed it was significantly colder in the house than it was outside in the summer night. Some of the dolls were missing their heads while others had dirty and torn clothing on them. Right above the pile, I noticed a picture hanging on the wall. I blew off the thick coat of dust and went into a coughing bit as it blew directly back into my eyes and down my throat. When I came to, I saw it was one of those creepy old-timey photos of the family, where no one was smiling, just vacant expressions staring back at me. There was a 30-something-year-old woman holding a baby with two little boys sitting by her sides. I realized they were standing in front of the house that I was currently invading. I turned around, and my blood ran cold. Standing at the opposite edge of the room in a doorway was a small boy, lit up in the beam of my flashlight. I jumped out of my skin and screamed as the light illuminated this figure. He was maybe 7 or 8 years old with sandy blonde hair and deep brown eyes. The light in his face didn't seem to bother him as he stared straight through me. I quickly recognized his face as one of the boys in the photograph. "Sir, what are you doing here?" The words slithered out of his mouth and up my spine, sending a cold chill throughout my body. I sat there dumbfounded as I stammered at the ghostly figure. "Can you help my brother?" "Please, sir," the boy requested of me. I was speechless. He quickly turned and darted into the room behind him. I stood there for a moment, but then I realized I had all of this on video and I was seeing dollar signs. This was the most incredible and terrifying thing I'd ever witnessed. I took a deep breath, made sure the phone was still recording, and made my way into the room. I passed through the doorway and into a room that looked pristine. Clean floors, painted walls, and wooden rocking chairs. It even appeared that night had turned back into day as the room looked dimly lit in the early morning light. I spotted yet another child off in the corner, just sitting on the floor, looking away from me, while the one who urged me into the room was leaning over something wrapped up on a couch. I made my way over to him, then glanced over his shoulder to see a baby cuddled up in a blanket cocoon. "He feels cold, sir. He hasn't made a sound in a long time, and we don't know what's wrong," the little boy said to me with sadness in his voice. The other child began rocking nervously. Hands clenched around his legs as he formed into a little ball. "Can you help us, sir?" the boy pleaded. The rocking child began to whimper and mumble under his breath. "I'm sorry, I don't know what I can do to help." I spoke to him. "Is your mother around? She can help you." It was at that moment that I heard a sound coming up from a staircase that I hadn't seen before. It started out very faint, but as the sound gradually grew, I could make out the heartbreaking sound of a woman crying. It persisted until it was a full-fledged wail that was ringing throughout the house. The boy rocking in the other corner quickly rose and sprinted out of the room. "You should leave, mister. She doesn't like visitors." At that moment, it was like something flipped a switch, and the once immaculate room was now dark and cluttered with disgusting furniture that was torn and rotting. The wailing from upstairs hadn't ceased, and I heard loud, vicious stomping on the floor right above me rapidly, making its way to the staircase and starting the descent to the room I was in. I felt frozen in place. I shined the light down onto the couch to see a dirty, dust-caked doll lying there in a blanket. I looked back up at what sounded like a raging bull hit the bottom of the stairs, then just stopped. So did the crying. I fell back and waited for what felt like hours for something to show itself. I tried to crawl backwards as my legs seemed to stop working. After what felt like an eternity, it started its way towards me, and my heart sank. Thud, thud, thud. Each pause between the steps was more suspenseful than the last. I sat there, hands shaking as my flashlight trembled with them. I tried to force myself to turn it off, but it was too late. I watched in horror as a figure dark as night with long, wispy hair and gangly limbs lumbered into the room. It seemed to stop and face me for a moment, and I could feel tears running down my face. After a brief pause, it made its way to the couch. It looked down at the old doll and stroked its head with long, bony fingers. It let its face collapse into its hands, and it began sobbing once more. Same as before, it gradually grew louder and louder until it was nearly deafening. It picked up the doll and held it tight to its chest before letting out an ear-piercing scream of pure despair. I was somehow able to get enough of the grip and pull out my knife. But as I did, this thing's neck violently twisted towards me and postured up. It towered high above me as its head nearly grazed the ceiling. At last, my legs found the strength I needed and adrenaline kicked in. I stopped the video and pocketed my phone before making a mad dash for the door. I heard rapid, heavy stomps close the distance instantly, and I felt a tremendous force knock me through the doorway that I'd been running through. I frantically looked up as my flashlight had fallen from my hands, but I could still make out the figure hurling itself through the beam of light, which was coming from the flashlight wherever it had landed. A symphony of screaming and crying was coming from this thing. It stood over me as it pinned me to the ground with immense strength. I managed to shake my arm free. I then attempted to slash at its base with the knife, but it grabbed my wrist with such force that I felt it was going to snap my arm. It clenched its cold hands around mine and slowly guided the knife down towards my stomach. I tried punching it with my now free hand as it slowly lifted my shirt and began running the blade down my abdomen. I screamed out in pain as it pierced my skin. I felt warm blood slide down my sides. My free hand frantically grasped for anything to use to defend myself with when I felt it go over a large piece of broken glass without hesitating. I grabbed it and stuck the thing in its eye. It let out a horrible cry and fell off me as I managed to sprint out of the house and into the boat. I could hear it crying that same mournful wail as I pushed the boat off and made it back to the cabin. I pulled in and tied the boat down before sprinting up to the house, but when I opened the door, I heard a horrible sound. The same crying was coming from somewhere inside my cabin. It sounded muffled at first, but grew in volume as I approached our bedroom. I made my way to the door, and as I opened it, the crying stopped. All I saw was Rachel slumbering peacefully the way I'd left her. I checked the closets, checked them to the bed, checked every room in the house, but could find no sign of anything out of the ordinary. I dove under the covers and curled up tightly next to Rachel, my body trembling in terror. I decided right there we were leaving the following day. I couldn't be here anymore. I don't know if it was exhaustion or the result of high adrenaline wearing off, but I somehow found sleep after cowering under the covers for a while. I had a dream, though. It was me walking to the shore of the island. I could see our cabin in the distance, a small candle in the living room providing it enough light to be seen. However, I had no control over my movements. Whatever I was actually seeing through, looked down at the water, dove in, and began swimming furiously toward the cabin. All the way I screamed for it to stop, but it only gained speed. It climbed onto the dock and sprinted at an unnatural speed, the earth seeming to shake underneath its feet. It opened the door of the cabin, slowing its pace, carefully making its way through the living room. Then down the hall. It stopped and looked right at the bedroom door. It creaked open the door and walked inside. There I was, sleeping like a baby. I watched its disgusting, monstrous fingers slowly reach down towards me before violently grabbing me by the throat. I jolted awake and immediately shook Rachel up. We have to go now. What? She replied in a groggy tone. Just start packing, we're leaving right now. I rushed her into the car and hastily threw everything I could find before speeding down the unpaved road and away from the place. Rachel groggily asked me what was wrong, but I couldn't seem to answer. I felt as though I was in shock, and I couldn't get any words to come out. It was then that I remembered the video. I recorded it all. I pulled out my phone and handed it to Rachel. Go through the videos. But watch the most recent one, I told her. I don't understand what I'm looking at here, she said in an exhausted voice before handing me the phone after watching for a few minutes. What? Please, babe, just watch it through, I pleaded with her. She mumbled something but was already asleep again. I didn't really care that she wouldn't see it now. I was just happy to be getting away from that place and back home. I stopped at a rest stop a few hours into the trip. The sun had just finished rising. After making a trip to the bathroom and grabbing a few sodas from a vending machine, I decided to take a look at the video myself. Either Rachel was just half asleep, or the video didn't come out clear like I'd hoped. I pulled open the video, and my heart sank. There was no house in front of me, just dense brush and a huge pile of bricks and wood. The remains of I scrolled through 2 hours of footage of me just standing there, staring straight ahead at nothing. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I scrolled through the video, and it was over 3 hours straight of me just standing there. I went to the end of the video before some movement finally caught my eye, because the end of the video consisted of me slowly pulling up my shirt, dragging a knife across my stomach and grunting in pain, before I dropped the knife and sprinted back to the boat in a panic, making my way back to the cabin. For several hours of the drive, I just sat in silence, unable to comprehend what all had happened. Even when Rachel took over driving, I would not let myself fall asleep in fear of having another nightmare. I didn't want to tell her, and I hoped that she was too tired to even remember me showing it to her. After the long 17-hour drive was finally over, we started to unload our stuff from the car. Rachel was gathering up all of her things while I started to haul in the larger pieces of luggage into the home. I walked into the house and set down all the luggage I was carrying. I felt a sense of unease take over. The air was thick and heavy, and the house was freezing cold. I reached for our doorknob to the bedroom and felt my heart sink. Just beyond the door, I could hear the faint sound of a woman sobbing.
I've lived near Ridgemont National Park for almost my entire life. Growing up just 10 minutes from its boundary meant the wilderness became my second home, a sanctuary where I could escape whenever life became overwhelming. The dense forests, winding trails, and the majestic waterfalls of Ridgemont have been constants in my life, places of comfort rather than fear. My connection to these woods began in childhood when my father would take me hiking every Sunday without fail. Nature is the greatest teacher, he'd say as we navigated rocky paths or identified bird calls echoing through the trees. Even after he passed away 7 years ago, I continued our tradition, finding solace in the familiar routes we once walked together. I'm not the type who startles easily. Years of wilderness exploration have taught me to respect nature rather than fear it. I've encountered black bears, weathered unexpected storms, and spent nights alone under starlit skies without incident. The rational part of my brain has always overridden any primal fear response until that autumn day last October. The morning had started like any other. I woke before sunrise, prepared my hiking gear with practiced efficiency, and checked the weather forecast. Partly cloudy, mild temperatures, perfect conditions for a day on the trails. I decided to take my companion Scooter, a medium-sized, mixed-breed dog I'd rescued as a puppy 7 years earlier. Scooter embodied everything you could want in a hiking partner: steady temperament, excellent trail discipline, and an intuitive understanding of the outdoors. He never barked unnecessarily, maintained a consistent pace beside me, and somehow always sensed potential dangers before I noticed them. His brown coat with scattered white patches made him blend seamlessly with the autumn woodland palette. As we pulled into the nearly empty parking area that bordered the eastern entrance to Ridgemont Falls, I noticed how the pale sky created a striking backdrop for the vibrant foliage. Bright crimson maples stood proudly among amber oaks and gold-leaved birches. The seasonal display promised a visually spectacular hike. "Ready for an adventure, boy?" I asked, clipping Scooter's leash as he hopped eagerly from the passenger seat. His tail wagged with anticipation, his nose already sampling the rich autumn scents, decomposing leaves, damp earth, and the distant mineral tang of the waterfalls. The trailhead welcomed us with its familiar wooden signpost, slightly weathered, but still clearly marking the various paths that sprawled through the park. I chose the Hemlock Ridge Trail, a moderately challenging route that would lead us to the upper viewing point of Sentinel Falls, the park's most impressive cascade. Though popular during summer months, autumn weekdays typically offered welcome solitude. We set off at a comfortable pace, boots and paws crunching rhythmically through scattered leaves. The forest embraced us immediately, tall trees forming a protective canopy overhead, sunlight filtering through in dappled patterns that shifted with each gentle breeze. The air felt crisp against my face, carrying that distinct autumn fragrance that somehow smells simultaneously of ending and beginning. Scooter trotted beside me contentedly, occasionally stopping to investigate an interesting scent or watch a squirrel scrambling up a nearby trunk. His behavior was entirely normal, relaxed, curious, but consistently attentive to our shared path. Nothing in his demeanor suggested any cause for concern. About 40 minutes into our hike, we stopped at a small clearing I'd visited countless times before. A fallen oak provided the perfect natural bench, and I unwrapped a protein bar while Scooter lapped water from the collapsible bowl I always carried. The distant sound of rushing water reached us even here, promising the falls were running strong after recent rainfall. "We'll reach the upper viewpoint in another hour," I told Scooter, who cocked his head as if understanding every word. "Then maybe we'll try that unmarked trail to the rocky outcrop. You remember, the one with the amazing view of the lower cascade?" As we continued our journey, the terrain gradually steepened. The trail narrowed in places, forcing us to navigate between rocky outcroppings and exposed tree roots. The forest around us changed subtly too. More hemlock and pine now, creating deeper shadows and a hushed atmosphere broken only by the increasing roar of falling water. What I didn't realize then was how this ordinary beginning would lead to the most unsettling experience of my life. Looking back, I searched for warning signs I might have missed, some indication that this day would be fundamentally different from hundreds of similar hikes. But there was nothing obvious, nothing that would have made me turn back. By midday, we had covered nearly 5 miles of trail, working our way steadily toward our destination. The main waterfall was now audible as a constant background rumble, growing louder with each step forward. Occasional glimpses of white water flashed between trees as the path wound closer to the river that fed the falls. "Almost there," I murmured to Scooter, who matched my stride with practiced ease. Neither of us could have predicted what awaited us at Sentinel Falls, an encounter that would challenge everything I thought I understood about Ridgemont National Park and my own perception of reality. The approach to Sentinel Falls follows a gradual descent through increasingly dense woodland. As Scooter and I made our way down the final stretch of trail, I noticed subtle shifts in the atmosphere around us. The temperature seemed to drop several degrees, though this wasn't unusual near waterways. What struck me as odd was the sudden absence of wildlife sounds. No birds calling, no rustling in the underbrush, just the persistent thunder of cascading water growing louder with each step. Scooter, typically relaxed on our hikes, began exhibiting unusual behavior. His ears pricked forward, then back, as if trying to locate a sound beyond my human hearing range. He slowed his pace, no longer leading eagerly but staying unusually close to my legs. When we paused at a trail junction, He sat pressed against my calf, eyes scanning the trees in a deliberate, focused pattern I'd never observed before. "What is it, buddy?" I asked, kneeling beside him and following his gaze. The forest looked normal, a rich tapestry of autumn colors, shadows stretching as afternoon light filtered through branches. Nothing appeared out of place. Yet I couldn't shake a growing sense of disquiet, as if we were being observed. We continued toward the falls, now following the path that ran alongside the river. The water moved rapidly here, tumbling over smooth stones worn down by centuries of persistent flow. Normally, I would have paused to appreciate the natural beauty, perhaps take some photographs of sunlight refracting through spray. Instead, I found myself constantly glancing over my shoulder, scanning the tree line for something I couldn't define. "Just being paranoid," I muttered to myself, forcing my attention back to the trail. Scooter wasn't convinced. His movements had become deliberately cautious, each paw placed with unusual precision as if testing the ground before committing his weight. His tail, normally held high in confident exploration, now hung in a neutral position, not frightened, but unmistakably alert. The main viewing platform for Sentinel Falls appeared ahead, a sturdy wooden structure extending slightly over the lower pool. On weekends, this area would typically host dozens of visitors, but today we had it entirely to ourselves. The solitude, usually welcome, now felt strangely oppressive. I approached the railing, Scooter reluctantly following. The falls presented a magnificent sight, water plummeting nearly 80 feet in a powerful, unbroken column before crashing into a churning pool below. Clouds of mist rose from the impact point, creating miniature rainbows where sunlight penetrated the spray. It should have been awe-inspiring. Instead, as I stood watching the hypnotic flow, an inexplicable sense of wrongness crept over me. The feeling wasn't precisely fear, not yet. Rather, it resembled the disorientation experienced upon entering a familiar room to find furniture subtly rearranged. Everything appeared correct at first glance, but something fundamental had shifted just beyond conscious recognition. "Let's check out that rocky viewpoint," I suggested to Scooter, partly to reassure myself through normalcy. The unmarked trail branching off to the right wasn't officially maintained by park rangers, but had been created through years of hikers seeking a more dramatic perspective of the falls. I'd visited it several times before, always rewarded with spectacular views of both upper and lower cascades. As we left the main trail, following the narrow dirt path through denser vegetation, Scooter's reluctance became more pronounced. Twice he stopped completely, looking back toward the main trail with what I can only describe as longing. Each time I encouraged him forward, he complied, but with none of his usual enthusiasm. The side trail wound upward, requiring occasional use of exposed tree roots as natural steps. After about 10 minutes of steady climbing, we emerged onto the rocky outcrop, a flat stone shelf jutting from the hillside approximately 30 feet above the main viewing platform. From this vantage point, the entirety of Sentinel Falls was visible, from its origin point where the river narrowed dramatically before its plunge, to the widening pools below where white water gradually calmed into rippling currents. I moved toward the edge, maintaining a safe distance from the sheer drop. Scooter, usually content to explore secure areas of such viewpoints, remained unusually stationary, positioning himself between me and the trail we descended. His posture had changed completely, legs stiff, head lowered slightly, attention fixed on something beyond my field of vision. That's when I noticed the silence. Despite standing mere yards from a powerful waterfall, the sound seemed muffled, as if heard through thick glass. The mist rising from below moved oddly, too, not following natural air currents but swirling in patterns that suggested deliberate formation. I blinked hard, attributing these perceptions to fatigue or perhaps the unusual lighting created by the pale autumn sky. When I reopened my eyes, everything appeared normal again, water falling naturally, sound restored to its proper volume. Yet Scooter remained tense, unconvinced by whatever adjustment my mind had made. "It's okay," I assured him, though uncertainty had crept into my voice. "Just a weird atmospheric thing." We stayed at the viewpoint for perhaps 15 minutes, during which Scooter never relaxed his vigilant stance. I tried focusing on the natural beauty surrounding us, taking deep breaths of mist-laden air, attempting to recapture the peace these woods had always provided. But something fundamental had changed, a shift in perception that transformed familiar terrain into something vaguely threatening. As we prepared to descend back to the main trail, I caught a glimpse of movement at the waterfall's edge, not within the water itself, but beside it, where dense vegetation bordered the cliff face. Just a momentary displacement, like a shadow adjusting to changed light. I focused on the area but saw nothing conclusive, just leaves stirring in patterns slightly discordant with the prevailing breeze. "Time to head back," I announced, more for my benefit than Scooter's. He needed no encouragement, immediately turning toward the descent path with unusual eagerness. As we navigated the steep sections of trail, I noticed my heartbeat had accelerated beyond what physical exertion warranted. My palms felt clammy despite the cool air, and I found myself frequently checking our surroundings rather than watching my footing. When we rejoined the main trail, Scooter's behavior changed again, not reverting to normal relaxation, but shifting to a new alertness directed specifically toward the area downstream from the falls. His muscles tensed beneath his fur, and a low sound vibrated in his throat. Not quite a growl, but the precursor to one. That's when I saw it for the first time, a figure standing partially obscured by foliage near the lower pool, approximately 50 yards downstream. The distance and intervening vegetation prevented clear details, but its general shape suggested a person of average height, motionless among the trees. I raised my hand in greeting, expecting a reciprocal acknowledgement from another hiker. No response came. The figure remained completely still, positioned at an angle that suggested it was watching us, but offering no confirmation through movement or gesture. I lowered my hand slowly, a creeping unease spreading through my chest, as I realized how oddly the figure was situated. Not on any established trail, standing in an area of dense undergrowth that would be difficult to navigate intentionally. "Hello?" I called, my voice nearly lost in the ambient sounds of rushing water. Again, no response or movement followed. Scooter's earlier tension had intensified. His body pressed against my leg as if seeking protection while simultaneously offering it. When I took an instinctive step forward, he moved with me, maintaining contact but clearly reluctant to approach whatever or whoever stood watching us from the shadows. After several uncomfortable moments, I decided against investigation. The rational part of my brain suggested another hiker exploring off-trail, perhaps a photographer seeking unique angles of the waterfall. But deeper instincts, the same primal warning system humans have carried since our earliest evolutionary stages, advised retreat. "Let's go, boy," I murmured, turning back toward the main trail that would return us to the parking area. Scooter didn't hesitate, immediately adopting a pace slightly faster than our typical hiking speed. As we moved away, I fought the overwhelming urge to look back, focusing instead on the path ahead and the rhythmic sound of our movement through scattered leaves. When we'd covered perhaps 100 yards, I finally surrendered to compulsion and glanced over my shoulder. The area where the figure had stood appeared empty now, showing only undisturbed vegetation. Relief washed through me briefly, followed by uncertainty. Had I imagined the entire encounter? Scooter's continued alertness suggested otherwise. His behavior confirmed that something unusual had occurred, something beyond normal wilderness experiences. As we continued our return journey, neither of us fully relaxed. The beautiful autumn forest, so familiar and comforting just hours earlier, now seemed filled with hidden recesses where unknown things might lurk just beyond perception. We maintained our accelerated pace until reaching the wider, more frequented sections of trail closer to the park entrance. Only then did Scooter's posture begin to normalize, his movements becoming more fluid and less defensive. My own tension dissipated more slowly, rational thought gradually reasserting control over instinctive responses. By the time we reached the parking area, I had nearly convinced myself that the entire experience stemmed from some combination of unusual lighting, natural wildlife movement, and overactive imagination. Almost convinced, but not entirely. Something about the motionless figure and the strange atmosphere surrounding the falls remained troubling in ways I couldn't easily dismiss. As we drove away from Ridgemont that afternoon, I made a mental note to research whether others had reported unusual experiences in the area. What I didn't realize then was that this initial encounter represented merely the beginning, the first indication of something deeply unsettling that would eventually draw me back to Sentinel Falls, under circumstances far more terrifying than I could possibly imagine. 2 weeks passed before I returned to Ridgemont National Park. Despite attempts to dismiss my previous experience as imagination, questions lingered, persistent enough to prompt research into local folklore and incident reports. What I discovered only deepened my unease. While finding no official documentation of strange occurrences, online forums revealed dozens of anecdotal accounts describing unusual experiences near Sentinel Falls. Most mentioned feelings of being watched. Several described inexplicable sounds. A few, those that truly disturbed me, detailed sightings of a dark figure observing hikers from various points around the waterfall. These reports spanned decades, with the earliest dating to the 1970s, when the park first opened to public access. What struck me most wasn't their consistency in describing physical details. These varied widely, but the emotional impact recorded by each witness. Person after person described the same visceral response, deep instinctive dread accompanied by certainty of being observed by something fundamentally wrong. I shared these findings with nobody. My friends would certainly mock such ghost stories, and I wasn't prepared to label my experience supernatural. Something had occurred at Sentinel Falls, something I couldn't explain through normal parameters, but jumping to paranormal conclusions seemed premature. Instead, I decided to return alone. Scooter's reaction during our previous visit, while validating my own perceptions, introduced an additional variable I wanted to eliminate. If something unusual existed in those woods, I needed to encounter it with only my own senses as witnesses. I chose a Tuesday morning, arriving at the eastern trailhead shortly after sunrise. The parking area stood empty, mist rising from damp ground as early light filtered through nearly bare trees. Most autumn foliage had fallen now, creating a carpet of decomposing leaves that muffled my footsteps as I began the familiar hike toward the falls. The forest appeared entirely normal, birds calling from remaining branches, occasional rustling as small mammals navigated ground cover, the distant sound of water gradually increasing as I approached my destination. Without Scooter's reactions to influence me, I found myself questioning whether I'd constructed an entire narrative from coincidental natural occurrences. I reached the main viewing platform approximately 90 minutes after setting out. The waterfall thundered impressively, its volume increased by recent rainfall. Spray created a perpetual dampness on surrounding rocks and vegetation, droplets catching morning light like suspended diamonds. Standing alone before this natural power, my previous fears seemed almost laughable. After spending several minutes appreciating the view from the official platform, I made a deliberate decision to follow the unofficial trail to the rocky outcrop where my previous discomfort had begun. The path seemed narrower than I remembered, vegetation pressing closer on either side, creating an enclosed feeling despite being in open woodland. Each step upward required more effort than memory suggested, as if the trail itself resisted my progress. Rational thought attributed this to ground softened by autumn precipitation, but subconscious impression suggested something more intentional. a gradual increase in resistance designed to discourage further advancement. I persisted, emerging finally onto the familiar stone shelf with its panoramic view of the falls. Morning light illuminated the cascade differently than during my previous visit, penetrating deeper into rising mist and revealing more detail in the rock face behind flowing water. For several minutes, I simply observed, cataloging every visible aspect of the scene for later comparison. That's when I noticed the first anomaly, a section of waterfall that didn't move correctly. While the main flow followed normal gravitational patterns, one peripheral stream along the eastern edge appeared to pause momentarily at irregular intervals, creating a strobe-like effect visible only when observed directly. I focused intently on this section, wondering if some unusual rock formation beneath the surface created the visual distortion. As I concentrated, the effect intensified rather than resolved. Water not merely pausing now but occasionally appearing to move upward against gravity for millisecond intervals. Optical illusion, I said aloud, my voice immediately absorbed by ambient noise, light refraction through spray. The logical explanation comforted me briefly until I realized another change had occurred while my attention fixed on the water. The quality of sound surrounding me had altered. The waterfall's roar remained constant in volume, but had somehow hollowed, taking on an echoing quality, as if heard from within a massive empty chamber rather than open woodland. I turned slowly, surveying the entire area from my elevated position. Nothing visibly unusual presented itself, just forest, rock, water, morning mist. Yet the sensation of wrongness intensified with each passing moment, raising hairs along my arms and neck despite completely rational surroundings. When I turned back toward the falls, everything changed. Standing on a narrow ledge beside the main cascade, a position impossible to reach without specialized climbing equipment, was the figure. No longer distant or partially obscured, it now occupied a clearly visible position approximately 40 feet from my location. Though completely exposed in daylight, details remained frustratingly indistinct, as if light bent abnormally around its form. Height and general shape suggested human proportions, but something in its posture communicated profound wrongness. Limbs angled slightly inappropriately, torso leaning beyond natural balance points without falling. Had it been wearing dark clothing, or was that its actual coloration? Even with direct observation, these basic details remained ambiguous. What registered with absolute clarity was its orientation, directly facing me with unwavering attention. Though I could discern no facial features through the visual distortion surrounding it, awareness of being observed penetrated to my core. This was no coincidence of shared space. This entity, I could no longer think of it as potentially human, had positioned itself specifically to interact with me. "Who are you?" I called, surprised by the steadiness in my voice, despite adrenaline flooding my system. No response came, just continued unnatural stillness. Not the normal stillness of a person attempting to remain motionless. Even breath and subtle shifting would be visible at this distance, but complete absence of micro-movements that distinguish living things from inanimate objects. I raised my hand, palm outward, offering a universal gesture of peaceful acknowledgement. For several heartbeats, nothing changed. Then, with movement too fluid to follow properly, the figure raised its own appendage in apparent mimicry. The gesture should have been reassuring, suggesting communication attempted. Instead, it provoked instant, overwhelming terror. The movement wasn't merely unnatural, it was wrong in ways my mind struggled to process. The limb extended too far, joints articulating at impossible angles, the entire motion occurring without proper correlation to physical mass. What appeared superficially human revealed itself as something fundamentally different, merely through this simple action. I stepped backward involuntarily, nearly losing balance on the uneven surface of the outcrop. Instinct urged immediate retreat. Yet some combination of fascination and disbelief kept me rooted in place. If this entity meant harm, Why remain at distance? If attempting communication, why not approach or speak? As these questions formed, the figure tilted its head at an angle exceeding normal vertebral rotation. The movement conveyed unmistakable inquiry. It was studying my reactions, cataloging my responses, learning through observation just as I attempted to understand it. The realization broke my paralysis. Whatever stood watching me from that impossible perch represented something beyond my experience or comprehension. Further interaction without understanding posed risks I wasn't prepared to accept. I turned toward the descent path, moving with deliberate calm despite every nerve screaming for rapid escape. 3 steps down the trail, I succumbed to compulsion and looked back. The ledge stood empty. My eyes darted frantically, searching surrounding areas for where the figure might have moved. Nothing appeared among trees or rocks. No movement disturbed vegetation along potential paths of travel. Complete disappearance within seconds, without sound or visible transition, defied logical explanation. Abandoning pretense of calm, I descended the trail at dangerous speed, nearly falling several times as my boots slipped on damp surfaces. Reaching the main trail, I paused momentarily, gasping for breath while scanning surrounding forest. Normal woodland sounds had returned, birds calling, leaves rustling, water flowing without acoustic distortion. I should have left immediately, returned directly to my vehicle and the safety of civilization. Instead, some irrational compulsion drew me closer to the base of the falls, toward the pool where thundering water created constant white noise and perpetual mist obscured clear vision. Approaching the water's edge, I studied the churning surface, dark in deeper sections, transparent where it flowed over smooth stones. Nothing unusual presented itself initially. Then, as my breathing slowed and eyes adjusted to the interplay of light and moisture, I noticed a reflection. Not my own image mirrored on the water's surface, but 2 points of light beneath it, seemingly suspended in deeper water where natural illumination shouldn't penetrate. They resembled eyes catching light, similar to nocturnal animals reflected in headlights, yet this was broad daylight, and the positioning made no biological sense. I leaned forward for better perspective, careful to maintain secure footing on slippery rocks. The points of light shifted slightly, not floating with water movement, but adjusting position independently, maintaining orientation toward me despite changing angle of observation. A voice behind me shattered the moment. "Beautiful spot, isn't it?" I spun around, heart hammering, to find an elderly man standing several yards away on the main trail. He wore standard hiking gear and carried a walking stick, presenting the perfect image of a regular park visitor enjoying morning exercise. "Yes," I managed to respond, voice steadier than expected given my internal state. "Spectacular." "Been coming here 40 years, the man continued, apparently oblivious to my distress. "Never gets old." I glanced back toward the water. The strange lights had vanished, leaving only normal reflections on disturbed surface. When I returned attention to my unexpected companion, his expression had changed subtly. Eyes narrowed slightly, head tilted in evaluation. "You saw something," he stated rather than asked. Not accusatory, but knowing, as if confirming a long-held theory. "What do you mean?" I countered, reluctant to validate experiences I still couldn't properly categorize. The man gestured vaguely toward the falls with his walking stick. "These old places have memories. Sometimes they take shape." He paused, studying my face. "Not everyone notices." Before I could formulate a response, he nodded politely and continued along the trail, soon disappearing around a bend without further comment. His casual acknowledgement of something inexplicable somehow disturbed me more than the encounter itself, suggesting others had experienced similar phenomena, yet local consensus maintained silence. I remained at the pool's edge for several more minutes, scanning water surfaces and surrounding terrain for any further anomalies. Nothing appeared, yet conviction grew that something continued observing from concealment. Patient, interested, fundamentally other. Finally, practicality overcame curiosity. Whatever presence inhabited Sentinel Falls clearly operated beyond normal parameters. Further investigation required preparation and possibly assistance. I began the return journey to the parking area, moving at deliberate pace while remaining vigilantly aware of my surroundings. The forest seemed to have returned to normal, sunlight strengthening as morning advanced, wildlife active throughout visible areas, trails solid and predictable beneath my boots. Yet subtle wrongness persisted in peripheral awareness. Occasional sounds, slightly disjointed from natural origins, movements among distant vegetation that didn't correlate with wind patterns, momentary temperature fluctuations without environmental cause. Reaching my vehicle without further incident provided little relief. Questions multiplied rather than resolved, centered on fundamental uncertainty. Had I experienced something objectively real, or were these events products of psychological projection? The elderly hiker's comments suggested external validation, yet his appearance and departure seemed suspiciously convenient. As I drove away from Ridgemont that morning, one certainty formed amid confusion. I would return to Sentinel Falls. Whatever presence resided there had revealed itself intentionally, initiated contact deliberately. Our interaction felt incomplete, a conversation interrupted rather than concluded. What I couldn't possibly know then was how that return would transform everything. Not just my understanding of Ridgemont National Park, but my entire conception of reality and the boundaries separating known from unknowable. The drive home passed in a blur of automatic functions, hands steering, feet operating pedals, eyes registering traffic signals, while my conscious mind remained trapped in continuous replay of the waterfall encounter. Each mental review revealed new details previously overlooked. How ambient temperature had dropped immediately before the figure appeared. The way certain birds had fallen silent while others continued normal calls. Subtle distortions in peripheral vision that might have indicated additional presences beyond the one directly observed. I arrived home mid-afternoon, physically exhausted despite minimal exertion. My small house, normally a sanctuary of comfort and familiarity, felt suddenly exposed. Too many windows overlooking dense woodland that bordered my property, too many shadows lingering in corners despite bright sunshine outside. After securing doors and drawing blinds against imagined observation, I collapsed onto my sofa and attempted to process the morning's events through rational frameworks. The most obvious explanation involved hallucination, perhaps triggered by environmental factors like toxic spores from forest fungi or natural gas leaking from subterranean pockets near the waterfall. Such phenomena could explain visual distortions, altered sound perception, and the overwhelming sense of wrongness that accompanied the experience. Yet this theory failed to account for multiple witnesses reporting similar encounters over decades. Unless Sentinel Falls somehow induced mass hallucination affecting specific individuals across generations, physical explanation seemed inadequate. The alternative, that something genuinely anomalous existed in those woods, opened possibilities I'd spent my adult life dismissing as superstition and folklore. I'd always approached unexplained phenomena with healthy skepticism, finding rational explanations behind supposedly supernatural events. Now, personal experience challenged fundamental assumptions about reality's consistent operation. My computer beckoned from across the room, promising access to information that might contextualize my experience. After brief hesitation, I succumbed to curiosity and began systematically researching Ridgemont National Park's history beyond tourist information and trail guides. What emerged through careful investigation painted a disturbing picture of the area surrounding Sentinel Falls. Before park establishment in the early 1970s, those specific acres had witnessed disproportionate tragedy. Multiple disappearances never resolved, accidents exceeding statistical probability, even documented cases of experienced hikers becoming inexplicably disoriented despite clear weather and familiar terrain. Most incidents lacked spectacular details, just ordinary people encountering extraordinary misfortune in apparently random patterns. Only when viewed collectively across time did disturbing consistency emerge. Proximity to the waterfall, occurrence during transition seasons, primarily spring and fall, and the complete absence of clear resolution in most cases. Official records attributed these events to natural hazards, slippery rocks, flash flooding, wildlife encounters, or simple navigational errors. Yet witness statements, where available, frequently contained unsettling commonalities. Reports of being watched, unusual atmosphere surrounding the falls, and occasional mentions of a shadowy presence observed shortly before misfortune occurred. As evening approached, my research shifted from documented incidents to local legends predating European settlement. Information proved sparse, filtered through unreliable translations and cultural misinterpretations, but certain elements appeared consistently across sources. Indigenous peoples who originally inhabited the region apparently considered the waterfall location spiritually significant, not as sacred ground to be revered, but as a boundary area requiring specific protocols before approach. Fragmentary references suggested belief in a watcher or guardian associated with the falling water, neither malevolent nor benevolent, but fundamentally neutral, an observer of human activity rather than participant. Some translations implied this entity preserved balance between worlds through continual vigilance, while others suggested it merely documented human presence without purpose beyond observation itself. The similarities between centuries-old beliefs and my personal experience proved unsettling. Though rational explanation remained possible, perhaps modern witnesses unconsciously incorporated elements of folklore they'd encountered previously. The concept of collective imagination creating consistent manifestations across generations seemed only marginally more plausible than accepting some form of objectively real phenomenon. Night had fallen completely by the time I exhausted available research sources. My house creaked with normal settling sounds that suddenly seemed significant. Shadows shifted with passing car headlights in patterns that momentarily resembled deliberate movement. Fatigue, combined with heightened alertness, created an uncomfortable mental state, where logical thought competed with instinctive responses. Sleep seemed impossible, yet necessary. I moved mechanically through evening routines, showering, preparing simple food I barely tasted, securing the house with double checks of locks and windows. When finally lying in darkness, eyes fixed on ceiling patterns while mind continued processing implications of discovered information, a new realization formed with disturbing clarity. The watcher I'd encountered hadn't appeared randomly during my visit. Its manifestation followed my deliberate decision to investigate the rocky outcrop, a location outside sanctioned trails offering perspective unavailable from official viewing areas. My choice to leave established boundaries had apparently triggered observation. This perspective recontextualized previous witness accounts. Perhaps the entity only revealed itself to those who demonstrated willingness to venture beyond conventional limitations, physical boundaries becoming metaphorical representations of conceptual thresholds. If accurate, this theory suggested intentionality behind encounters rather than random manifestation. The question remaining, why me specifically, offered no satisfactory answer. Nothing distinguished my circumstances from thousands of other hikers who explored Ridgemont annually. I possessed no special sensitivity to paranormal phenomena, maintained no spiritual practices that might attune perception to alternate realities. I represented the quintessential ordinary witness, making my experience simultaneously more credible and more disturbing. Morning arrived after intermittent sleep, punctuated by dreams too fragmented for clear recall, but leaving emotional residue of profound disquiet. Daylight restored some rational perspective, allowing professional obligations and daily necessities to temporarily override obsessive analysis of the previous day's events. Yet throughout normal activities, awareness of unfinished business lingered. The encounter at Sentinel Falls felt incomplete, a communication initiated but not concluded, an interaction suspended rather than resolved. This perception carried uncomfortable implications that something might expect continuation, might consider our connection ongoing despite physical separation. I spent 3 days in this state of functional normalcy, overlaying deep unease. Regular routines provided surface comfort, while deeper awareness monitored surroundings for anomalies. Small inconsistencies, a book not quite where I remembered placing it, unexplained sounds from empty rooms, momentary glimpses of movement in reflective surfaces, accumulated into persistent background anxiety. Sleep deteriorated further, leading to microsleep episodes during waking hours where consciousness briefly suspended. During these moments, hypnagogic imagery consistently featured water flowing in impossible directions and dark figures standing just beyond direct vision. Each episode lasted mere seconds but left lingering disorientation that complicated normal functioning. By the 4th evening following my encounter, physical exhaustion demanded resolution. I stood at my kitchen window as twilight descended, watching shadows lengthen across my backyard where forest began beyond property boundaries. The woods appeared entirely normal, birds settling for evening, occasional movements of small mammals preparing for night, leaves shifting in gentle breeze. Yet perception insisted on alternative interpretation, each natural movement potentially concealing purposeful activity, darkness between trees, possibly harboring patient observation. The boundary between rational assessment and paranoid delusion had blurred dangerously, threatening psychological stability if left unaddressed. "This ends now," I stated aloud to empty rooms. Decision crystallized with unexpected clarity. I would return to Sentinel Falls the following morning, not seeking further encounter, but establishing definitive conclusion. Whatever presence inhabited that location, whatever interaction had begun during previous visits, required formal termination through deliberate choice rather than fearful avoidance. I spent the remainder of that evening in practical preparation, checking weather forecasts, assembling appropriate gear, planning specific approach and departure routes. The process restored sense of agency previously compromised by uncertainty. If something awaited my return to Ridgemont, it would meet someone prepared rather than confused. Before sleeping, I composed detailed notes documenting all experiences and research findings related to Sentinel Falls. These I sealed in an envelope addressed to my closest friend, with instructions to open only if I failed to make contact by specified deadline. The precaution seemed melodramatic yet prudent, given statistical history of unfortunate incidents in that specific location. Sleep came easier that night, still fragmented but deeper between wakeful periods. Dreams continued featuring water and observation themes but felt less intrusive, more symbolic than literal. Morning arrived with unusual psychological clarity, despite physical fatigue. I dressed systematically in layers appropriate for variable autumn temperatures, packed minimal supplies focusing on practical necessities rather than comfort items, and placed my sealed envelope prominently on the kitchen counter, where it would be immediately visible to anyone entering the house. As I prepared to depart, momentary hesitation prompted one additional action: retrieving my father's old hunting knife from storage and securing it in an accessible belt sheath. The blade offered minimal practical utility for ordinary hiking, but provided psychological comfort through connection to family tradition and symbolic protection. The early morning drive to Ridgemont passed under gradually lightening skies, clouds gathering in patterns suggesting afternoon precipitation, but currently allowing weak sunshine to illuminate the landscape. Traffic remained minimal on rural roads, creating illusion of isolation that matched my internal state. Arriving at the now familiar parking area, I noted 2 other vehicles already present: a small sedan likely belonging to day hikers, and a maintenance truck marked with Park Service insignia. The presence of others should have provided comfort through shared human occupation of the space. Instead, it heightened awareness that potential witnesses complicate situations requiring privacy. Gathering my backpack and securing my vehicle, I stood momentarily at the trailhead considering optimal approach. Standard paths would likely intersect with other visitors, while less traveled routes might be monitored specifically by whatever presence occupied the area. After brief deliberation, I chose the main trail, reasoning that established routes provided security through visibility while approaching my destination. The hike began under normal conditions, forest sounds appropriate to early day, physical exertion matching remembered levels, familiar landmarks appearing at expected intervals. Yet, subtle differences accumulated as I progressed deeper into park boundaries. Certain areas seemed darker than surrounding forest, despite identical canopy coverage. Occasional cold spots manifested without apparent meteorological cause. Wind moved through vegetation, creating sound patterns that almost resembled words, not quite coherent, but suggesting communication just beyond comprehension threshold. These phenomena increased proportionally with proximity to the falls, building gradually rather than manifesting suddenly. By the time water sounds became clearly audible, the entire atmosphere had shifted toward the same wrongness I'd experienced previously. Not dramatically altered, but fundamentally different from normal woodland conditions. I paused approximately half-mile from the main viewing platform, securing my backpack against a tree trunk and removing unnecessary items to maximize mobility. The hunting knife remained accessible at my waist, not drawn but consciously present as both tool and talisman. "I'm returning to conclude our interaction," I stated aloud to apparent emptiness. Nothing more. No response came from surrounding forest, yet subtle tension in atmosphere suggested acknowledgement. Birds continued calling. Insects maintained constant background hum. Wind moved through branches without interruption, all normal activity continuing without the silence that typically signals predator presence. The contradiction, everything appearing normal while feeling profoundly wrong, characterized the remainder of my approach. Each step toward Sentinel Falls increased dissonance between visual information and instinctive response. By the time the main viewing platform came into view, peripheral vision registered constant movement that disappeared when directly observed. The platform stood empty of other visitors, despite vehicles in the parking area. Water thundered over the cliff face in apparently normal patterns, creating standard mist clouds and rainbow refractions where sunlight penetrated spray. Nothing visibly unusual presented itself for immediate identification. Yet wrongness persisted at fundamental perceptual level, not attached to specific sensory input, but underlying all experience. The sensation resembled awareness of being observed through one-way glass, knowledge of scrutiny without ability to locate observer. I approached the railing with deliberate calm, maintaining awareness of surroundings, while focusing primarily on the waterfall itself. The cascade appeared unchanged from previous visits. Water volume consistent with recent rainfall, flow patterns following normal gravitational principles, impact creating standard turbulence in the collection pool below. Only after extended observation did anomalies become apparent, subtle inconsistencies emerging through patient attention rather than immediate perception. Certain sections of falling water occasionally paused mid-air for millisecond intervals. Light refracted through mist at mathematically impossible angles. Sound fluctuated in patterns unrelated to actual water movement. "I acknowledge your presence," I stated, voice level despite internal tension. "I've witnessed your manifestation." The words vanished into ambient noise without apparent effect. For several minutes, nothing changed beyond normal environmental fluctuations. I maintained position at the railing, consciously breathing deeply while scanning surrounding area for response. When manifestation finally came, it occurred without dramatic revelation, simply a gradual coalescence of darkness among trees, approximately 50 yards downstream from my position. The shape formed slowly enough that precise moment of appearance remained indeterminate, yet suddenly stood fully present where emptiness had existed moments before. The figure maintained similar characteristics to previous encounters. humanoid proportions without detailed features, dark coloration possibly representing clothing or natural composition, stillness exceeding normal physical capability. Yet this manifestation presented with greater definition, as if deliberately making itself more clearly perceptible. Neither of us moved initially. Observer and observed engaged in mutual assessment across intervening space. No communication attempted beyond simple presence. No action suggested beyond acknowledgement of shared awareness. The encounter might have appeared entirely benign to hypothetical third-party witness, unaware of context. After several minutes of this strange communion, I deliberately raised one hand in formal greeting gesture. The response came immediately, the figure's appendage lifting in mirror movement, yet with articulation that defied normal anatomical constraints. What should have been direct mimicry instead revealed fundamental otherness through subtle wrongness of execution. "What do you want?" I asked directly, abandoning pretense of casual interaction. No verbal response came, yet the figure tilted its head in gesture universally recognized as inquiry, simultaneously familiar in meaning yet disturbing in execution. The movement suggested not lack of communication capability, but choice of alternative method. I modified approach accordingly, gesturing toward the falls, then back to the figure, attempting non-verbal inquiry about connection between entity and location. The response manifested as slight intensification of presence, not physical growth, but increased definition against background environment. Understanding formed gradually through this rudimentary exchange. The entity wasn't hostile in conventional sense. It sought neither harm nor interference with human activity. Its purpose appeared fundamentally observational, content with witnessing rather than participating in events surrounding its domain. This realization brought unexpected relief. Whatever inhabited Sentinel Falls represented something unknown rather than actively malevolent. Strange beyond comfortable comprehension, but not inherently threatening through deliberate intention. "I meant no intrusion," I stated, attempting to convey respect rather than fear. "I'll leave your territory undisturbed." The figure remained motionless briefly, then performed a movement impossible to describe through normal physical parameters. Not quite nodding, not precisely bowing, yet conveying clear acknowledgement of statement received and understood. As I prepared to depart, unexpected movement caught attention. The entity glided several yards closer without apparent walking motion, maintaining same orientation toward me, but reducing distance between us. The approach wasn't threatening, but carried unmistakable purpose. When it halted again, arm extended toward me, not reaching but indicating specific direction. Following the gesture, revealed it pointing not at me directly, but at the hunting knife secured at my waist. The implication seemed clear, even without verbal exchange. "You want this?" I asked, hand moving toward but not touching the blade. The figure performed another movement beyond proper description, something conveying affirmation without being precisely nodding. Request appeared undeniable despite complete absence of compulsion. Choice remained entirely mine, yet preferred outcome stood clearly indicated. After brief internal debate, I carefully removed the knife from its sheath, examining it momentarily before placing it gently on flat rock surface between us. The object held monetary value but immense personal significance as family connection, precisely the type of meaningful sacrifice suggested throughout historical accounts of appeasing boundary guardians. No sooner had I withdrawn my hand than sudden increased mist obscured the immediate area. When visibility returned seconds later, both figure and knife had vanished without trace. The rock surface remained visibly dry despite surrounding moisture, suggesting directed rather than natural phenomenon. I remained motionless momentarily. Processing implications of interaction just concluded. Whatever entity inhabited Sentinel Falls had initiated contact, communicated specific request within limited capabilities, and apparently concluded interaction upon receiving desired offering. Turning to depart, unexpected lightness filled my awareness. not emotional relief, but physical sensation suggesting burden removed. The persistent wrongness that had characterized the area diminished noticeably, returning surroundings to normal woodland atmosphere, experienced thousands of times before. My return journey passed without incident, standard forest sounds accompanying steady progress, familiar landmarks appearing at appropriate intervals, nothing suggesting observation or presence beyond ordinary wildlife. By the time I reached the parking area, the entire experience had acquired dreamlike quality, despite vivid recall of specific details. The drive home permitted gradual reintegration with normal perspective. What had occurred at Sentinel Falls represented genuine anomaly, something beyond conventional explanation requiring acknowledgement as objectively real experience rather than psychological projection or environmental hallucination. Yet the encounter also suggested conclusion rather than beginning, interaction completed through mutual recognition and appropriate exchange. The watching presence existed within defined boundaries, apparently content maintaining established patterns without expanding influence beyond traditional domain. Arriving home late afternoon, I immediately destroyed the sealed envelope left that morning. Its contingency precautions no longer necessary following successful resolution. The loss of my father's knife caused momentary regret, quickly replaced by understanding of appropriate exchange. Some sacrifices balance scales in ways logic cannot fully comprehend. That evening passed in profound exhaustion, yet equally profound relief. Whatever had begun at Sentinel Falls now appeared properly concluded, interaction acknowledged, boundaries established, respective territories recognized. Sleep came without interruption from strange dreams or sudden wakings, first truly restful night since initial encounter. The following morning brought renewed normal perspective, daily obligations reasserting priority over extraordinary experience. Yet permanent changes remained beneath surface awareness, expanded understanding of reality's potential complexity, recognition that established scientific frameworks might accommodate only portion of actual phenomena, and deep appreciation for boundaries separating known from unknown. I would eventually return to Ridgemont National Park, hiking familiar trails with restored enjoyment. But Sentinel Falls remained exception to this resurrection of normal activity, not through active avoidance, but respectful acknowledgement of established boundary. Some places deserve recognition as transition zones, where different rules apply and different presences maintain vigilant watch. The offering given that day, physical object representing connection between generations, apparently satisfied whatever requirement governed interactions with the watcher at the falls. Its acceptance marked conclusion rather than invitation, exchange rather than obligation. In subsequent years, I occasionally encountered others who described similar experiences at Sentinel Falls or comparable locations throughout the region. To these individuals, I offered neither confirmation nor denial of personal knowledge, merely suggestion that some boundaries merit respect through mindful distance rather than aggressive crossing. What watches from Sentinel Falls continues its patient observation, existing in parallel with human activity, without requiring acknowledgement or understanding. Those who encounter its manifestation may interpret the experience through religious, supernatural, or psychological frameworks according to individual perspective. For myself, categorization became less important than recognition. Something exists beyond conventional understanding, something that watches from boundaries between known and unknown, occasionally visible to those who approach thresholds with appropriate awareness. Some might call this entity ghost, spirit, or hallucination. I prefer simply watcher, neutral observer existing at intersection points where different aspects of reality meet like water flowing from one level to another, creating transitional zones where normal rules temporarily suspend. Its continued existence requires neither belief nor dismissal, merely acknowledgement that human perception and scientific categorization may encompass only portion of reality's actual composition. The watcher at Sentinel Falls serves as a reminder that boundaries exist for reasons we may not fully comprehend, but nevertheless deserve respectful recognition. 6 months passed before circumstances drew me back to Ridgemont National Park. Winter had come and gone, leaving the landscape transformed through seasonal cycles. Early spring vegetation now clothed previously bare branches, and increased rainfall had swollen streams throughout the park to impressive volumes. Sentinel Falls would be at peak flow, a spectacle drawing numerous visitors despite lingering cool temperatures. My return wasn't planned. A wildlife photography group I occasionally joined had scheduled their annual spring expedition to document migrating birds that favored the park's varied habitats. The invitation arrived during a particularly monotonous work week, offering welcome escape from office confinement. I accepted without conscious consideration of previous experiences until commitment had already been established. Only when reviewing meeting details the night before did full awareness surface. We would be entering through the eastern access point, following trails that inevitably passed close to Sentinel Falls. The realization triggered immediate physical response: increased heart rate, slight perspiration, momentary lightheadedness familiar from previous encounters with the unexplainable. Rational assessment suggested minimal risk involved. Our group would number 12 experienced outdoor enthusiasts moving together along established trails during daylight hours. Previous research indicated the watcher primarily interacted with solitary individuals who ventured beyond sanctioned viewpoints. Additionally, our offering exchange had apparently concluded whatever interaction the entity sought. Yet instinctive wariness persisted despite logical reassurance. Dreams that night featured flowing water and distant observation, not frightening but unsettlingly reminiscent of actual experiences. Morning arrived with lingering unease beneath manufactured enthusiasm. The photography group assembled at designated meeting point shortly after sunrise. Retirees, nature enthusiasts, and amateur photographers united by appreciation for wilderness documentation. Equipment ranged from professional-grade telephoto lenses to modest consumer cameras, all carried by individuals exhibiting comfortable familiarity with forest environments. Our guide, a retired biology professor specializing in ornithology, outlined planned route encompassing several distinct ecosystems where target species most frequently appeared. His cursory mention of passing the waterfall area midday provoked unexpected tension that I carefully concealed from companions. Initial hiking proceeded uneventfully through gradually awakening forest. Early morning light filtering through emerging foliage created ideal photography conditions. Soft illumination without harsh shadows, wildlife active yet unhurried in morning routines. Conversation remained appropriately subdued, limited to occasional whispered identification of species or technical discussion of optimal camera settings. I found unexpected comfort in group presence. Shared experience grounding perception in collective reality rather than isolated interpretation. When unusual sensations occasionally registered, momentary temperature fluctuations, sound distortions at range limits of normal hearing, context rendered them less significant through ordinary social interaction. Approaching midday, our path gradually converged with trails leading toward Sentinel Falls. The familiar increase in ambient moisture signaled proximity even before water sounds became audible. Vegetation changed accordingly, more ferns among ground cover, moss thickening on northern exposures of trees and rocks, fungi varieties appearing with greater frequency in decomposing organic matter. Our guide announced short break before continuing to official viewing platforms. Group members dispersed slightly within visible range, some photographing small waterfalls along tributary streams, others documenting early spring wildflowers emerging between exposed roots. I remained deliberately central among companions, avoiding isolation while maintaining casual appearance. One photographer, an older woman whose equipment suggested serious dedication to wildlife documentation, approached as I adjusted camera settings. "Have you visited here before?" she inquired conversationally. "A few times," I acknowledged, maintaining focus on equipment to avoid revealing potential discomfort. "Mainly autumn hikes." She nodded thoughtfully, gaze shifting toward the increasing mist visible through trees ahead. "Strange place, isn't it? Something about the atmosphere." Her comment, delivered casually without dramatic emphasis, caused immediate internal alertness. Before responding, I studied her expression, finding neither conspiracy theory enthusiasm nor knowing smirk, just matter-of-fact observation from experienced outdoor enthusiast. "The waterfall creates interesting microclimates," I offered neutrally. "More than that," she replied, voice lowered slightly, though surrounding conversations provided adequate privacy. "You've noticed it too, I can tell. Something watches here." The direct acknowledgement of phenomena I'd attributed to personal experience created conflicting responses. Validation that perceptions might represent objective reality rather than psychological projection, yet discomfort at having experiences identified by stranger through casual observation. "What makes you say that?" I managed, attempting neutral tone despite accelerated pulse. She shrugged, adjusting lens cap with practiced efficiency. "Been coming here 40 years. Some places have personalities. This one observes." The phrasing echoed uncomfortably close to words spoken by the elderly hiker encountered during previous visit. Before pursuing this striking similarity, our guide signaled group reassembly for continued movement. Approaching the main viewing platform required passing through increasingly dense mist generated by the waterfall's impressive spring volume. Droplets accumulated on camera equipment and clothing, creating miniature rainbow refractions where sunlight penetrated vapor clouds. Under normal circumstances, these optical phenomena would merit appreciation rather than suspicion. The platform accommodated our group comfortably, despite several other visitors already present. Standard tourist behaviors manifested around us. Photographs taken from optimal vantage points, conversations elevated above natural water sounds, appropriate expressions of appreciation for scenic beauty. Nothing suggested anyone besides myself and possibly the female photographer perceived anything beyond normal wilderness experience. Yet subtle wrongness persisted beneath conventional appearance. Water movements occasionally contradicting gravitational expectations, sound patterns including frequencies slightly beyond comfortable hearing range, shadows moving with marginal independence from casting objects. These anomalies remained sufficiently minimal that conscious attention required for detection, explaining why casual visitors displayed no unusual reactions. Our guide directed attention toward rock formations visible through mist, explaining geological processes that created the waterfall's distinctive appearance. I participated in group observation while maintaining peripheral awareness of surrounding environment, particularly areas downstream where previous manifestations had occurred. Nothing unusual appeared during 30 minutes spent at official viewing areas. The waterfall performed according to natural principles visible to ordinary perception. Wildlife behaved according to established patterns, and atmospheric conditions remained consistent with meteorological expectations. Relief gradually replaced vigilance as normal experience continued uninterrupted. When our guide announced continuation towards meadow areas likely to host target bird species, I joined group movement without hesitation. The path leading away from Sentinel Falls followed elevated terrain, providing occasional glimpses of the cascade from increasing distance. With each step of separation, subtle tension diminished proportionally. We had progressed perhaps half-mile beyond the falls when unexpected conversation resumed beside me. The female photographer had matched my walking pace, positioning herself for private discussion while remaining visibly part of larger group. "It didn't show itself today," she stated without preamble. "You've seen it though, haven't you?" Direct acknowledgement of experiences I'd shared with no one created immediate internal conflict. Desire for validation competing with protective instinct to maintain silence regarding encounters beyond conventional explanation. After brief hesitation, compromise seemed appropriate. "I've noticed unusual atmospheric effects around the falls," I admitted carefully. Her knowing smile suggested recognition of deliberate understatement. "Most people experience nothing beyond pretty scenery. Others feel watched but dismiss the sensation. Few actually see the guardian." The term, identical to descriptions found in historical research following my initial encounter, confirmed shared phenomenon rather than coincidental linguistic choice. This woman possessed knowledge beyond casual observation, perhaps comparable to information I'd accumulated through personal experience and subsequent investigation. "What do you know about it?" I asked quietly, glancing ahead to ensure conversation remained private despite surrounding group members. She maintained walking pace, attention apparently focused on surrounding forest rather than discussion topic. "Been part of this area long before the park existed. Indigenous peoples recognized it centuries before European arrival. Watches boundaries between worlds, not malevolent, just observant." The description aligned precisely with conclusions drawn from my research and personal interaction. This confirmation from apparently unrelated source suggested objective phenomenon rather than subjective interpretation, something genuinely present rather than psychologically constructed. "Have you encountered it directly?" I inquired, curiosity overcoming caution. "Twice in 40 years, she replied without hesitation. "Once in my 20s when I foolishly ventured off trail during thunderstorm. Second time 15 years later when photographing night scenes during autumn equinox. Both encounters brief, observational rather than interactive. Her experience differed from mine, witnessing rather than exchanging, yet fundamental similarities reinforced growing certainty regarding the watcher's existence and general characteristics. Before pursuing further information, group movement separated us as trail narrowed through dense vegetation. The remainder of our expedition passed without unusual occurrence. Wildlife photography occupied group attention throughout afternoon, resulting in substantial documentation of migratory species and early spring flora. Conversation remained focused on biological and technical subjects, with no further opportunity to continue discussion of Sentinel Falls phenomena. As group members prepared to depart from final gathering point in parking area, the female photographer approached once more, offering business card with contact information. "If you want to discuss your encounters further," she explained quietly. "I've collected accounts from others who've experienced similar phenomena, not for publication or internet speculation, just personal understanding." I accepted her card with mixed emotions. Appreciation for potential information source competing with desire to establish distance from disturbing experiences. Her parting comment resonated uncomfortably, despite casual delivery. "It remembers those it's encountered. The fact you're here in group setting suggests your interaction concluded appropriately. Not everyone manages such clean resolution." With these cryptic words, she departed with other group members, leaving unsettling implications regarding potential outcomes for those whose interactions with the watcher followed different patterns. The suggestion that our exchange of knife for departure constituted appropriate resolution implied alternatives I preferred not contemplating. The drive home provided opportunity for processing this unexpected development. Another witness, apparently credible, experienced, and knowledgeable, had independently confirmed phenomena I'd begun questioning despite vivid memory. Her casual certainty regarding the watcher's existence suggested either shared delusion or genuine encounter with objectively real entity beyond conventional categorization. Days passed while I debated contacting her for further information. Professional obligations and daily routines gradually decreased urgency, until the business card became simply another item in desk drawer. Potential connection maintained, but not activated. The compromise satisfied both curiosity regarding expanded knowledge and protective instinct, advising distance from further involvement. 2 weeks later, circumstances forced reconsideration of this comfortable arrangement. While reviewing photographs taken during the group expedition, I discovered an anomalous image captured without conscious intention. The frame, ostensibly documenting early spring foliage along trail leading from Sentinel Falls, contained unexplainable element unnoticed during initial download. Background forest appeared normal in all respects, with expected vegetation and lighting conditions creating pleasant nature scene. What drew immediate attention was partial figure, visible between distant trees. Humanoid shape, lacking distinct features, yet unmistakably present despite no memory of person occupying that position when photograph was taken. Enlarging the image decreased rather than increased clarity, with figure becoming less rather than more defined through digital enhancement. The form appeared to incorporate elements of surrounding vegetation while maintaining distinctly separate existence, simultaneously part of forest backdrop, yet independently present within scene. Comparison with sequential images taken minutes before and after showed empty forest in identical location, confirming no physical person occupied that position during photography session. The figure appeared in single frame without preceding approach or subsequent departure captured in surrounding images. This tangible evidence, captured through mechanical process rather than subjective perception, eliminated remaining doubt regarding objective reality of phenomena experienced at Sentinel Falls. Whatever watched from those woods existed independently of psychological projection or environmental hallucination, manifesting sufficiently to register on digital sensor through standard optical processes. The business card emerged from desk drawer that evening. Contact information entered into phone with mixture of trepidation and anticipation. Our conversation began cautiously, establishing mutual understanding regarding encounters without detailed disclosure of personal experiences. Arrangements developed for meeting at neutral location, public cafe in town midway between our respective residences. 3 days later, seated at corner table with adequate privacy despite public setting, information exchange proceeded with unexpected directness. The photographer, introducing herself formally as Catherine, presented organized documentation spanning decades of reported encounters around Sentinel Falls and similar locations throughout the region. I've confirmed 67 distinct witness accounts since beginning collection in the 1980s, she explained, voice maintained at conversational level despite extraordinary subject matter. Patterns emerge across reports despite witnesses having no contact with each other. Her organized approach impressed me. Methodical documentation without sensationalism or supernatural interpretation. Each account received clinical categorization based on objective criteria: encounter location, seasonal timing, witness demographics, interaction type, and subsequent effects on individuals involved. The resulting dataset revealed consistent patterns impossible to dismiss as coincidence. Encounters clustered around seasonal transitions, particularly autumn and spring when natural boundaries between growth and dormancy created transitional states. Locations consistently involved water features, especially where significant elevation changes occurred. Witnesses predominantly traveled alone or in pairs rather than larger groups. Most significantly, interaction outcomes fell into distinct categories, with predictable results based on witness response to initial contact. Those who maintained respectful distance while acknowledging presence typically experienced no negative consequences. Those who attempted communication through appropriate means, usually involving symbolic exchange, often reported positive resolution similar to my own experience. The concerning category involved witnesses who responded with fear-driven aggression, deliberate dismissal, or attempt to document the entity through modern technology beyond simple photography. These individuals frequently reported ongoing phenomena following initial encounter: persistent observation sensations, sleep disruption involving water symbolism, and occasional manifestations in previously secure environments, including private residences. The watcher doesn't pursue or stalk in predatory sense, Catherine clarified, anticipating my unspoken concern. But disrespectful interaction, appears to create prolonged connection rather than concluded exchange. The observation continues beyond geographical boundaries once established under certain conditions. This explanation contextualized my own experience, the exchange of knife apparently representing appropriate conclusion ritual that severed ongoing connection. Had I departed without offering acceptable resolution, observation might have continued beyond physical proximity to Sentinel Falls. What exactly is it? I asked directly, seeking definition beyond descriptive observations. Catherine's expression combined resignation with analytical precision. Classification depends entirely on conceptual framework. Indigenous perspective would identify guardian spirit associated with boundary location. Religious interpretation might suggest angel or lesser divinity maintaining natural order. Scientific approach would hypothesize undocumented consciousness existing through alternate physical properties beyond current measurement capabilities. Her deliberately inclusive response avoided commitment to specific explanation while acknowledging multiple interpretative frameworks. This intellectual humility impressed me more than confident proclamation would have. Genuine phenomena frequently elicit exactly this type of categorical uncertainty among honest observers. All frameworks contain partial truth, she continued thoughtfully. What matters practically isn't precise definition, but appropriate interaction protocol when encounters occur. The consistent pattern across centuries suggests stable entity with established behavioral parameters, rather than random manifestation of subjective experiences. Our conversation continued several hours, exploring documented cases with similar characteristics to my own encounter. The database contained sufficient reports to establish statistical validity beyond anecdotal coincidence, yet remained unknown within conventional scientific or paranormal research communities. Deliberately maintained as private record rather than published analysis, subject to skeptical dismissal or sensationalist distortion. Before departing, Catherine offered access to broader network of witnesses who periodically shared experiences and observations regarding boundary phenomena throughout the region. The invitation tempted through promised validation and expanded understanding, yet potential consequences gave pause. Further involvement might strengthen rather than resolve connection to experiences better left concluded. Consider carefully, she advised, recognizing unspoken hesitation. Many find comfort in shared knowledge and confirmation of experiences society dismisses. Others prefer returning to conventional perspective where explanations remain comfortably familiar, despite inadequately addressing actual phenomena. Both choices are valid depending on individual needs. With this philosophical neutrality, our meeting concluded, information shared without recruitment, validation offered without obligation. I departed with expanded understanding, yet increased uncertainty regarding appropriate response to experiences now confirmed through external verification. Subsequent weeks brought gradual integration of new information within existing perspective. The photograph containing the watcher remained secured in encrypted digital storage, tangible evidence maintaining connection to objective reality while appropriately removed from daily consciousness. Catherine's contact information similarly remained available without demanding immediate utilization. My relationship with Ridgemont National Park achieved balanced equilibrium. Regular hiking resumed along trails distant from Sentinel Falls, allowing wilderness appreciation without re-engaging potentially complicated interactions. When circumstances occasionally required passing near the waterfall, I maintained respectful acknowledgement without seeking direct encounter. Boundary recognition acceptable to both human visitor and apparent guardian. The watcher continued its vigilant observation of boundaries between known and unknown, manifesting for those whose perception allowed recognition while remaining invisible to visitors seeking only conventional wilderness experience. Its existence neither threatened established reality nor demanded acknowledgement, simply maintaining ancient patterns predating human categorization systems. Occasionally, while hiking distant sections of Ridgemont, Momentary awareness of observation registers briefly before dissipating. Not unsettling presence, but recognized coexistence. Mutual inhabitants of landscape containing more than immediately visible components. The sensation resembles awareness of wildlife watching from concealment. Natural presence rather than supernatural intrusion. The knife remains wherever exchanges occur between different aspects of reality. Physical object transitioning from human ownership to whatever alternative existence accommodates the watcher's requirements. Its loss represents appropriate cost for knowledge gained, connection established, and subsequent release properly negotiated. What watches from Sentinel Falls continues its patient vigilance, preserving boundaries established before human memory, while adapting to changed circumstances surrounding its domain. Those who encounter its manifestation may interpret the experience through individual conceptual frameworks, yet underlying phenomenon remains consistent despite varied terminology applied to its existence. The park contains both ordinary natural beauty and extraordinary manifestations, depending entirely on visitor perception and boundary recognition. Both experiences remain equally valid within their respective frameworks, neither diminishing reality of alternative interpretation. The watcher observes without judgment, maintaining ancient patterns while modern hikers pursue contemporary appreciation of landscapes containing multiple layers of existence simultaneously. Some boundaries deserve respect through appropriate distance rather than aggressive crossing. Some knowledge affects perception permanently without providing definitive explanation. Some encounters conclude properly through mutual recognition rather than enforced categories. These lessons remain whether the watcher manifests as objective entity or symbolic representation of transitional awareness, where different aspects of reality meet like water flowing between levels, creating spaces where observation continues from perspectives beyond ordinary understanding. Summer arrived with increasing temperatures and corresponding rise in park visitation. Tourists populated main trails daily, concentrated around scenic viewpoints, including Sentinel Falls. This human presence created buffer zone between ordinary experience and potential boundary phenomena. The watcher reportedly manifested rarely during peak visitation periods, according to Catherine's documentation. Despite establishing comfortable distance from previous encounters, my intellectual curiosity persisted. The photographer's database provided tantalizing fragments, suggesting broader context beyond isolated incidents. Patterns extending throughout regional geography and historical documentation. Understanding these connections promised integration of personal experience within comprehensible framework, potentially transforming unsettling encounters into manageable knowledge. Research began cautiously, focusing initially on geographical distribution rather than phenomenon itself. Using public records, historical accounts, and archaeological documentation, I mapped locations where similar reports clustered throughout northwestern woodland regions. The resulting pattern revealed consistent association with specific landscape features. Wherever significant water features intersected dramatic elevation changes, reports increased proportionally to create statistical anomalies impossible to dismiss as random distribution. Sentinel Falls represented merely one node within an extensive network of similar locations, sharing distinctive characteristics. Each site featured water transitioning between elevation levels through significant drop, creating environmental boundaries where different ecosystems intersected. These physical characteristics apparently corresponded with increased boundary phenomena, including watcher manifestations and associated experiences. Historical investigation revealed additional patterns. Indigenous cultures throughout the region designated these specific locations as spiritually significant, not through traditional sacred site protocols but distinctive boundary recognition practices. Archaeological evidence documented ritualized activities at these precise locations dating centuries before European contact, consistently involving symbolic exchanges rather than conventional worship behaviors. Anthropological records indicated specialized terminology in multiple indigenous languages, specifically referencing those who watch from falling water, or comparable phrases depending on translation accuracy. These linguistic markers appeared consistently across otherwise unrelated cultural groups, suggesting observation of objectively real phenomena rather than isolated cultural construction. European settlement brought dramatic reduction in formal recognition of these locations, yet folk practices persisted through modified traditions. Early colonial documents referenced peculiar atmospheres surrounding certain waterfall locations, with subsequent generations developing informal protocols for safe passage involving token offerings at specific sites. These practices continued despite official religious discouragement, suggesting experiential necessity rather than superstitious persistence. Modern documentation revealed continued awareness, despite contemporary scientific frameworks rejecting explanations beyond established categories. Park ranger logs contained numerous incident reports classified as visitor disorientation, concentrated around specific locations including Sentinel Falls. These official records noted statistical anomalies without proposing explanations beyond environmental factors affecting human perception. Throughout research process, I maintained appropriate boundaries, investigating historical and geographical patterns rather than attempting direct re-engagement with phenomena previously encountered. This scholarly distance preserved concluded interaction status, while expanding contextual understanding surrounding the experiences. 3 months into this investigation, sufficient patterns emerged to justify consultation with Catherine regarding preliminary findings. Our meeting occurred at the same neutral cafe, documentation arranged in organized presentation, reflecting academic rather than sensationalist approach to extraordinary subject matter. "You've identified convergent evidence across multiple disciplines," she observed after reviewing materials. "Most researchers focus exclusively on witness accounts or folklore traditions. Few integrate archaeological evidence, geographical distribution, and linguistic markers across cultural boundaries." Her approval validated methodological approach while raising complex implications. If boundary phenomena associated with waterfall locations demonstrated consistent manifestation across centuries, documented through multiple independent sources, traditional dismissal through psychological or cultural explanation became increasingly inadequate. The pattern suggests objective phenomena operating according to consistent parameters, I concluded, maintaining scientific terminology despite extraordinary subject. Whether interpreted through spiritual, psychological, or alternative physics frameworks, something observable exists at these locations with sufficient consistency to generate documentation across diverse human populations throughout recorded history. Catherine nodded thoughtfully, adding personal observation from decades documenting similar phenomena. The consistency extends beyond manifestation to interaction patterns. Appropriate exchange behaviors generate similar results regardless of belief systems involved. This suggests rule-based phenomena rather than subjective experience. Our discussion continued exploring implications of compiled evidence. If watcher phenomena operated according to consistent parameters across centuries, potential existed for establishing formal understanding beyond individual anecdotal experiences. The resulting framework might allow development of appropriate interaction protocols for those encountering boundary manifestations, while simultaneously preserving scientific perspective regarding unexplained phenomena. "Have you considered publication?" Catherine asked, carefully, acknowledging academic risks associated with controversial subject matter. The question prompted immediate internal conflict, desire for broader validation, competing with protective instinct toward carefully established professional reputation. Academic standing required maintenance of conventional boundaries regarding acceptable research topics, with career implications for transgressing established parameters. "Not through traditional channels," I acknowledged after thoughtful consideration. Formal publication would require theoretical framework acceptable within current scientific paradigm. Evidence suggests phenomena operating beyond established categories, creating immediate rejection regardless of methodological rigor. Catherine accepted this assessment with knowing resignation, having navigated similar terrain throughout decades, documenting boundary phenomena. Her approach, maintaining private database while sharing information through carefully established networks of qualified individuals, represented practical compromise between documentation needs and protection from inevitable dismissal by conventional institutions. There's another approach worth considering, she suggested, introducing alternative direction for accumulated research. Historical documentation suggests practical application rather than theoretical understanding motivated traditional knowledge systems regarding boundary phenomena. Indigenous practices focused on appropriate interaction protocols rather than explanatory frameworks. This perspective shifted research emphasis from understanding what watched from falling water toward establishing how interactions should proceed when encounters occurred. Historical evidence suggested centuries of accumulated human experience had developed functional protocols maximizing positive outcomes during boundary encounters. Knowledge preserved through cultural practices, despite absence of explanatory frameworks acceptable to modern scientific establishments. Practical wisdom rather than theoretical explanation, I summarized, recognizing valuable direction shift, focusing on what works rather than what explains. This approach aligned with personal experience. The knife exchange had apparently concluded interaction appropriately, despite occurring without comprehensive understanding of the watcher's nature or origin. Perhaps complete explanation remained unnecessary for practical navigation of boundary phenomena, similar to how early sailors utilized stellar navigation effectively, despite lacking astrophysical understanding of observed celestial bodies. Our collaboration expanded following this conceptual reorientation. Catherine introduced additional witnesses whose experiences contributed valuable data regarding successful interaction protocols during boundary encounters. These individuals represented diverse backgrounds, from traditional knowledge keepers maintaining indigenous practices to accidental witnesses who intuitively developed appropriate responses during unexpected encounters. Common elements emerged across seemingly disparate accounts. Successful interactions typically involved 1. Acknowledgement of presence without aggressive approach. 2. Offering of personally significant item rather than random object. 3. Verbal or symbolic expression of boundary recognition and respect. 4. Deliberate conclusion, ritual, signaling interaction completion. These protocols functioned effectively regardless of witness belief systems, working equally well for traditionally spiritual individuals, secular rationalists, and those maintaining agnostic uncertainty regarding phenomena classification. The consistent results suggested rule-based reality rather than belief-dependent manifestation. My contribution involved documenting geographical parameters, predicting potential encounter locations, by analyzing topographical features alongside historical incident clusters. Predictive mapping identified locations throughout the region where boundary conditions supported potential watcher manifestations. This practical application transformed abstract research into useful resource for individuals potentially navigating encounter situations. The resulting collaborative document, Practical Protocols for Boundary Locations, a Field Guide, combined Catherine's decades of witness documentation with my geographical and historical research. Rather than attempting explanation of phenomena origins, the guide focused entirely on practical navigation of potential encounters, empowering readers with accumulated wisdom without demanding theoretical acceptance. Limited distribution maintained appropriate boundaries between public information and specialized knowledge. Copies provided to individuals with demonstrated need rather than general publication. Rangers working specific locations received anonymously submitted copies, as did search and rescue personnel, frequently responding to disorientation incidents in boundary areas. Additional distribution targeted indigenous knowledge keepers, maintaining traditional practices at identified locations. This practical application of research findings provided significant closure regarding personal experiences at Sentinel Falls. Understanding my encounter within broader context normalized extraordinary experience without diminishing its significance, simultaneously validating personal perception while establishing appropriate distance through scholarly perspective. Autumn approached with cooling temperatures and decreasing park visitation. Ridgemont's forest began annual transformation from green uniformity to vibrant diversity, creating natural celebration of seasonal boundaries perfectly aligned with research focus. As personal connection to accumulated knowledge deepened, unexpected development forced reconsideration of established boundaries regarding direct engagement with phenomena previously encountered. Email communication from Catherine arrived containing digital photographs submitted by a recent park visitor. The image, captured at Sentinel Falls during late afternoon hike, showed familiar waterfall backdrop with distinctive anomaly visible in peripheral area. Enlargement revealed dark figure positioned among trees, proportions matching previously observed manifestations, but with crucial addition. Clearly visible object held in appendage resembling hand. The held item appeared identifiable as knife, with distinctive handle matching father's hunting blade offered during previous encounter. This physical connection between concluded personal interaction and continuing manifestation challenged established assumption regarding appropriate resolution. If exchange truly represented conclusion, why would the watcher continue displaying surrendered object months after interaction completion? Additional information accompanied the photograph. Timestamp confirming recent capture rather than historical documentation. Photographer details establishing credible witness unfamiliar with previous incidents, and precise location data placing sighting at identical position to personal encounter months earlier. This development created immediate decision requirement: maintain established distance from concluded interaction, or investigate potential continuing connection through deliberate return to encounter location. Practical wisdom suggested respectful distance, while intellectual curiosity advocated controlled investigation under established protocols, documented through research. After thorough consideration, compromise approach emerged. Return to Sentinel Falls would occur during specifically selected conditions, maximizing safety while enabling observation without necessitating direct interaction. Late autumn weekday with forecasted overcast conditions would minimize general visitation while providing adequate daylight for safe navigation. Additional precautions would include 1. Notification of trusted individual regarding exact itinerary. 2. Scheduled check-in communications at predetermined intervals. 3. Maintenance of established trails rather than venturing toward isolated locations. 4. Observation from designated viewpoints without seeking direct engagement. 5. Carrying appropriate offering should unexpected interaction occur, despite preventive measures. This structured approach balanced investigative necessity against established wisdom regarding boundary respect. The purpose involved clarification rather than resumption. Determining whether continued manifestation with familiar object represented unfinished interaction requiring additional resolution, or simply established pattern unrelated to personal connection. The selected date arrived with appropriate conditions: heavy cloud cover discouraging casual visitation without threatening dangerous precipitation, temperatures cool but not prohibitive for extended outdoor activity, autumn foliage past peak display, reducing tourist presence to minimal levels. Park entrance revealed empty visitor center parking with single ranger vehicle indicating standard monitoring without special circumstances. Hiking familiar trails toward Sentinel Falls produced expected physical sensations: moderate exertion, ambient woodland sounds appropriate to season, Occasional wildlife movements visible through increasingly bare forest understory. Normal environmental experience persisted until approximately 1 mile from the waterfall location, where subtle atmospheric shift occurred despite absence of visual or auditory anomalies. The transition manifested as slight pressure change perceptible in sinus cavities and inner ear structures, similar to elevation adjustments during air travel, but occurring without actual altitude variation. This physiological response aligned with documented accounts describing boundary proximity sensations reported by multiple witnesses in Catherine's database. Continuing forward with heightened awareness, additional subtle anomalies accumulated gradually. Slightly delayed sound echoes from footsteps on rocky sections, momentary peripheral movements without identifiable sources, temperature variations unrelated to canopy coverage or wind patterns. These phenomena remained within parameters documented as normal boundary indicators, rather than escalating to direct manifestation level. The main viewing platform appeared ahead, completely vacant, despite accessibility and spectacular seasonal display. Water volume had decreased from spring levels, but maintained impressive flow, creating standard mist clouds and impact turbulence where cascade met collection pool. Nothing visibly unusual presented within normal observational parameters. I maintained position at official viewing area, establishing clear intention through predetermined verbal statement despite apparent absence of audience beyond normal woodland inhabitants. I've observed the continued display of exchanged items and seek clarification regarding interaction status. No additional engagement is requested beyond information regarding proper conclusion if previously established protocols were insufficient. No immediate response followed this declaration. Water continued falling without disruption. Ambient forest sounds maintained appropriate rhythms. Light conditions remained consistent with general weather patterns. For approximately 20 minutes, nothing occurred beyond ordinary environmental processes. Then, subtle shift registered at subconscious level before conscious perception identified specific change. The waterfall sound altered slightly, not volume or flow rate, but acoustic properties affecting how sound waves traveled through surrounding air. The modification created unusual clarity, where certain frequency ranges became distinctly perceptible despite distance from source point. Within this altered acoustic environment, pattern emerged resembling structured communication rather than random variation. The water sounds organized into rhythmic sequences with distinct pauses between groupings, suggesting deliberate formation rather than natural flow patterns. Though lacking linguistic components recognizable through conventional understanding, the sequences conveyed unmistakable intentionality. I remained motionless, allowing sensory systems to adapt to modified perception parameters. Additional anomalies manifested gradually, air movements around the platform occurring in patterns unrelated to thermal currents or wind direction, light refraction through mist creating sustained, rather than momentary rainbow formations, vegetation near water's edge moving in coordinated patterns, despite individual stems lacking physical connection. These phenomena matched documented accounts of active boundary conditions without crossing threshold into direct manifestation observed during previous encounter. The experience suggested intentional communication through environmental adjustment rather than physical appearance. More subtle interaction respecting established boundaries while acknowledging registered presence. After approximately 40 minutes, environmental conditions returned to normal parameters through equally gradual transition. Water sounds resumed standard acoustic properties. Air movements followed natural thermal patterns. Light refraction returned to expected physical behavior based on atmospheric conditions. The shift concluded with sudden clarity regarding knife display in recent photograph. Not indication of unfinished business, but confirmation of exchange acknowledgement. The understanding formed without conventional information transfer mechanisms, yet carried absolute certainty, transcending subjective interpretation. The watcher had displayed the exchanged item not as request for additional interaction, but as demonstration of maintained agreement between parties, recognition of concluded communication, rather than continuation invitation. This revelation provided complete resolution to lingering questions regarding encounter status. The boundary between human visitor and watching entity remained appropriately established, exchange protocols had functioned as intended, and continued separate existence proceeded with mutual recognition, rather than ongoing obligation. Nothing further required action or resolution from either participating consciousness. I departed Sentinel Falls with profound sense of completion, transcending mere intellectual understanding. The research documenting boundary phenomena across geographical locations and historical periods retained scientific validity and practical application. The personal experience maintained appropriately integrated status within larger understanding. The watching presence continued its ancient observational role, without requiring human categorization or explanation. The practical protocols document would continue distribution to appropriate recipients, potentially preventing negative outcomes during future encounters without necessitating theoretical frameworks beyond individual comfort zones. Indigenous wisdom, historical documentation, and contemporary experience had successfully integrated into functional approach, transcending explanatory limitations while preserving practical utility. Ridgemont National Park contained wilderness beauty, accessible through conventional understanding, alongside boundary phenomena perceptible to appropriately attuned awareness. Both realities coexisted without contradiction or conflict, parallel experiences available according to perceptual frameworks brought by individual visitors. The watching presence acknowledged those capable of recognition while remaining appropriately invisible to those unprepared for expanded awareness. What watches from falling water continues its patient observation across countless locations where boundaries between different aspects of reality permit interaction under specific conditions. Those encountering its manifestation may interpret through frameworks ranging from spiritual guardian to interdimensional entity to psychological projection, each perspective containing partial validity, without encompassing complete understanding beyond human categorical limitations. Some knowledge remains experiential rather than explanatory, practical rather than theoretical, mysterious rather than defined. The watcher embodies this understanding through continued existence beyond classification systems, while operating according to consistent interaction parameters when boundaries temporarily thin between different aspects of reality. Winter descended upon Ridgemont with characteristic severity, heavy snowfall transforming familiar landscapes into temporarily alien terrain, freezing temperatures creating crystalline formations where water previously flowed freely, shortened daylight hours limiting wilderness access to brief windows between dawn and dusk. Park visitation decreased to occasional hardy enthusiasts specifically equipped for extreme conditions rather than casual tourists seeking scenic views. During this seasonal dormancy, my research continued expanding through historical archives and indigenous knowledge preservation projects. Winter traditionally represented storytelling season among native cultures throughout the region, elders sharing accumulated wisdom during long evenings when outdoor activities remained necessarily limited. This traditional timing made accessing cultural knowledge regarding boundary phenomena surprisingly accessible through properly respectful channels. Several indigenous knowledge keepers, after establishing my sincere interest and respectful approach, shared traditional understandings regarding watching entities associated with waterfall locations. Their perspectives emphasized relationship rather than explanation, how different aspects of reality maintained appropriate connections through boundary guardians, ensuring proper separation while permitting occasional necessary communication across established divisions. The watchers existed before people came to these lands, one elder explained during extended conversation. They maintain boundaries between worlds that must remain separate for proper functioning, yet require occasional interaction for balanced existence. They observe without judgment, ensuring passages occur only when appropriate conditions align and proper protocols maintain respectful interaction. This relational understanding contrasted with Western categorical approach seeking definitive classification within established frameworks. Indigenous perspective suggested some phenomena inherently resist final explanation, while operating according to consistent principles discernible through accumulated experience rather than theoretical models. This wisdom aligned precisely with practical protocols emerging from research collaboration with Catherine. As winter deepened toward solstice, unexpected communication arrived from previously unknown source. A university anthropology professor studying indigenous storytelling traditions had encountered Catherine's contact information through academic networks focused on folklore preservation. His research revealed historical documentation of ceremonial gathering traditionally occurring at Sentinel Falls during winter solstice, specifically addressing watching entities through collective acknowledgement. The recorded practice hasn't occurred in living memory, his detailed message explained. Historical documentation indicates participation from multiple tribal representatives gathering at specific waterfall locations during solstice to maintain appropriate boundary recognition through formal exchange protocols. The ceremony reportedly prevented boundary deterioration that might otherwise result from extended seasonal freezing of waterfall flows. This information introduced previously unconsidered dimension to boundary phenomena research. If watching entities maintained connections with flowing water serving as physical manifestation of metaphysical boundary, seasonal interruption through freezing might potentially disrupt established patterns maintained through centuries of consistent interaction. Traditional gatherings potentially served practical function beyond mere cultural observation or supernatural supplication. Further investigation through historical weather records revealed concerning pattern. Years featuring complete freezing of Sentinel Falls during winter months statistically correlated with increased incident reports surrounding the location during subsequent spring seasons. These incidents, categorized through Park Service records as visitor disorientation events requiring rescue intervention, occurred with significantly higher frequency following winters when water flow ceased completely for extended periods. Indigenous ceremonial gatherings had apparently served practical function, maintaining boundary stability during seasonal transitions, when natural mechanisms temporarily suspended. The discontinued practice, interrupted through colonial displacement and subsequent cultural disruption, potentially explained increased modern incidents during specific seasonal patterns matching conditions currently developing in Ridgemont. Weather forecasts predicted historically low temperatures continuing through upcoming solstice period, with Sentinel Falls expected to freeze completely for first time in 17 years. Without traditional ceremonies maintaining appropriate boundary recognition during this critical transition period, potential existed for significant disruption to established interaction patterns carefully documented through collaborative research. The situation required difficult decision regarding appropriate response. Personal involvement carried potential risks given previous direct encounters with boundary phenomena. Professional reputation concerns remained relevant, considering mainstream academic dismissal of subject matter beyond established categories. Practical limitations included severe weather conditions, making wilderness access dangerous even for experienced individuals properly equipped for extreme environments. After thorough consideration involving consultation with Catherine and selected Indigenous advisors, compromise approach emerged balancing various considerations. A small group would conduct abbreviated ceremony, acknowledging watching entities and offering appropriate exchanges during winter solstice at Sentinel Falls. The gathering would include 1. Indigenous knowledge keeper maintaining traditional understanding of proper ceremonial protocols. 2. Catherine representing accumulated contemporary documentation of boundary phenomena. 3. myself contributing geographical and historical research perspective 4. The anthropology professor bringing academic observation balanced with appropriate respect. This limited participation acknowledged ceremonial significance without attempting large-scale recreation of traditional gatherings that rightfully belonged within specific cultural contexts. The purpose focused on practical boundary maintenance rather than spiritual or academic objectives, addressing potential physical disruption through appropriate acknowledgement protocols documented across diverse sources. Preparation involved practical considerations beyond ceremonial aspects. Winter conditions required specialized equipment for safe wilderness navigation, insulated clothing layers, traction devices for icy terrain, emergency supplies ensuring survival should unexpected circumstances delay return to civilization. Communication protocols established regular check-ins with outside contacts monitoring expedition progress through satellite devices, functioning beyond cellular coverage limitations. The solstice morning arrived with temperature readings reaching historic lows, frozen landscape glistening under clear skies that promised spectacular visibility while guaranteeing brutal cold. Our small group assembled at park entrance before dawn, reviewing final safety protocols while preparing equipment for challenging hiking conditions. The indigenous elder, introducing himself simply as Joseph, conducted brief blessing ceremony before departure, establishing appropriate mindset for approaching boundary locations with necessary respect. The trail to Sentinel Falls, normally requiring 90 minutes, extended into a 3-hour journey through snow-covered terrain, requiring careful navigation around ice-encased obstacles. Conversation remained minimal during transit, partly conserving energy in challenging conditions, but primarily maintaining appropriate solemn preparation for ceremonial purpose. Each participant carried small offerings selected according to personal significance rather than material value, following documented protocol patterns maximizing successful boundary interactions. Approaching the falls revealed dramatic transformation from familiar appearance. Where water normally thundered continuously, now massive ice formations created crystalline sculpture, seemingly suspended in mid-flow. Sunlight refracting through translucent surfaces created rainbow projections across surrounding snow-covered landscape. The scene presented breathtaking natural beauty, while simultaneously emphasizing profound wrongness. Dynamic boundary converted to static display through seasonal interruption. Joseph paused at trail junction, leading to viewing platform, conducting brief personal ceremony before proceeding further. His practiced movements demonstrated lifetime familiarity with protocols appropriate for boundary approaches, establishing permission rather than assuming access rights. Only after completing these preparations did he signal readiness for continued advancement toward primary ceremonial location. The main viewing platform provided adequate space for our small gathering despite partial snow coverage, reducing usable surface area. Joseph directed positioning according to traditional parameters. Participants forming semicircle facing frozen waterfall with specific orientation, aligning solar position with geographical features. Individual placement apparently carried significance beyond practical arrangement, suggesting ceremonial mapping reflecting larger cosmological understanding. The watching ones respond to intention and respect rather than specific words or actions, Joseph explained, while removing ceremonial items from his pack. Different peoples develop different approaches, but underlying recognition remains consistent across traditions. We acknowledge boundaries requiring maintenance while offering exchange demonstrating respect for necessary separation. The ceremonial process unfolded through careful stages blending traditional elements with practical considerations adapted for contemporary circumstances. Small fire established in portable container provided both practical warmth and symbolic transformation medium. Botanical elements, cedar, sage, sweetgrass, produced aromatic smoke carrying ceremonial significance, while physical molecules traveled boundary spaces between participants and frozen waterfall. Joseph's spoken components incorporated indigenous language phrases alongside English translations, ensuring understanding among participants while maintaining traditional formulations carrying centuries of accumulated meaning. The content emphasized relationship rather than supplication, acknowledging mutual existence within shared landscape while respecting necessary separations between different aspects of reality. Each participant presented individual offerings through ceremonial process involving statement of personal intention, followed by physical placement at designated location. Catherine contributed handcrafted journal containing witness accounts documenting boundary encounters. The anthropologist offered traditional tobacco acquired through appropriate indigenous sources. My contribution involved topographical map documenting boundary locations throughout regional watershed systems. Throughout ceremony, ambient conditions remained physically normal, yet perceptually altered. Standard winter forest environment experienced through heightened awareness, creating distinctive ceremonial atmosphere. The frozen waterfall reflected sunlight without unusual patterns. Surrounding vegetation remained appropriately static in windless conditions, and wildlife absence matched expected behavior during extreme temperature conditions. As ceremonial components neared completion, subtle atmospheric changes accumulated gradually. Not dramatic manifestations, but progressive shifts in perception parameters similar to previous boundary encounters. Air density appeared to fluctuate slightly, creating visual distortion reminiscent of heat mirages despite freezing temperatures. Sound transmission acquired unusual clarity, where distant forest noises registered with unexpected precision. Light reflection through ice formations produced sustained rather than transitional rainbow effects, maintaining consistent positions despite changing solar angles. Joseph acknowledged these manifestations through ceremonial response, indicating expected development rather than concerning anomaly. His practiced movements and confident continuation suggested witnessing anticipated ceremonial progression rather than unexpected phenomena requiring adaptation. The ceremony continued through predetermined stages without interruption, despite increasingly apparent boundary thinning effects surrounding our small group. The culmination approached with solar position, reaching ceremonial alignment appropriate for solstice observance. Joseph indicated final offering stage, requiring simultaneous presentation of remaining ceremonial elements, while maintaining specific positional arrangement, reinforcing boundary recognition patterns. The precise timing apparently held particular significance regarding transitional moments during seasonal extremes, when natural boundaries underwent maximum stress through environmental conditions. As this critical juncture approached, dramatic transformation occurred without warning. Massive cracking sounds echoed across the viewing area as frozen waterfall sections shifted position, not through temperature change causing melting, but apparently through internal pressure building within ice structures. Large crystalline formations fractured along multiple planes, creating momentary impression of impending collapse, threatening participant safety. Instead of falling, separated ice sections remained suspended in physically impossible configurations, massive weight unsupported by visible means, yet maintaining precise positions, creating three-dimensional pattern throughout previously solid formation. The resulting configuration resembled frozen explosion captured mid-process, with hundreds of individual ice fragments hanging motionless in complex arrangement defying gravitational expectations. Within this transformed environment, boundary manifestation occurred beyond previous experience parameters. Rather than singular watching entity appearing at specific location, multiple presence indicators manifested simultaneously throughout suspended ice array. Each major fragment contained subtle darkness, suggesting entity partial manifestation, creating impression of fragmented consciousness distributed across physical environment rather than unified presence occupying specific location. Joseph maintained ceremonial focus despite unprecedented manifestation scale, continuing final ritual components with practiced precision indicating preparation for various potential development scenarios. His calm procedural adherence communicated confidence through established protocols, despite extraordinary circumstance presentation, providing stability anchor for less experienced participants encountering boundary phenomena exceeding previous documentation. The distributed manifestation stabilized momentarily, then underwent secondary transformation as individual fragments began emitting subtle illumination from interior darkness. The effect resembled bioluminescence observed in deep marine organisms, but occurring within solid ice structures suspended throughout the frozen waterfall. This internal light source created complex shadow patterns across snow-covered landscapes surrounding the viewing platform, forming recognizable symbolism, matching petroglyph documentation from archaeological sites throughout the region. The anthropologist gasped audibly while retrieving documentation materials from his pack, apparently recognizing specific symbolic patterns representing significant cultural markers known through academic research. Catherine maintained observational focus while recording manifestation details through written notation and occasional whispered comments into small recording device. Joseph continued ceremonial process without interruption, suggesting experience with similar manifestations through traditional knowledge transmission. My own response combined academic observation with visceral recognition, intellectual categorization, documenting unprecedented phenomena occurring simultaneously with intuitive understanding beyond rational explanation. The boundary between scholarly researcher and direct participant blurred through immediate experience, transcending theoretical frameworks, creating integrated perception incorporating multiple awareness levels operating simultaneously. As manifestation intensity peaked, communication occurred without conventional sensory input. Information transferred directly through awareness modification rather than symbolic representation requiring interpretation. The content conveyed complex understanding regarding boundary maintenance functions served by watching entities, natural systems incorporating non-physical components, ensuring different reality aspects, maintained appropriate separation while permitting necessary interaction under specific controlled conditions. The watching presence, normally manifesting as singular entity at Sentinel Falls, actually represented localized expression of distributed consciousness, extending throughout regional watershed systems. Seasonal freezing interrupted physical manifestation medium without affecting underlying consciousness, creating temporary discontinuity, requiring acknowledgement through ceremonial recognition, re-establishing appropriate relationship patterns. This direct information transfer occurred without linguistic structure, yet conveyed precise conceptual understanding, transcending normal communication limitations. Each participant apparently received information components aligned with individual perspective and understanding capacity. Joseph, nodding with recognition of concepts aligned with traditional knowledge. Catherine, documenting confirmation of research patterns. The anthropologist experiencing academic framework expansion, incorporating previously dismissed indigenous wisdom validity. The manifestation reached maximum intensity, then began gradual recession phase, suspended ice fragments slowly resuming normal physical behavior through sequential rather than simultaneous movement. Individual sections descended at controlled pace, reconnecting with main ice formation through precise alignment, restoring apparent natural configuration, while maintaining subtle interior illumination visible only through direct observation under specific awareness conditions. As physical manifestation returned toward normal parameters, final communication occurred through brief but intense awareness modification. The content conveyed appreciation for ceremonial acknowledgement, while confirming establishment of appropriate boundary maintenance continuation through winter season. Additional information suggested similar acknowledgement would benefit multiple regional locations experiencing parallel seasonal transition challenges through interrupted water flow serving as physical manifestation medium. Joseph completed ceremonial closure sequences as manifestation concluded, ensuring appropriate transition from direct interaction to separated existence while maintaining respectful recognition of continued presence beyond active communication phase. His practiced movements demonstrated generations of accumulated wisdom regarding proper boundary interaction protocols preserved through cultural transmission, despite historical disruption. Our small group remained at the viewing platform through brief recovery period, allowing integration of extraordinary experience within individual processing frameworks. Joseph offered traditional beverages supporting physical recovery, while simultaneously serving ceremonial conclusion function. Conversation remained minimal, despite numerous potential discussion topics, each participant apparently requiring personal integration time before attempting verbal exchange regarding shared experience, exceeding conventional descriptive capacity. The return journey proceeded without incident beyond normal winter hiking challenges. Weather conditions remained stable, equipment functioned as designed, and navigation followed established routes without disorientation, despite significant emotional and psychological processing occurring simultaneously with physical travel. Check-in communications maintained scheduled intervals, providing security confirmation for external contacts, monitoring expedition progress. Upon returning to park entrance facilities, our group conducted brief debriefing session establishing documentation protocols while respecting ceremonial aspects requiring appropriate privacy. Joseph provided guidance regarding which observed elements could be appropriately recorded for research purposes versus ceremonial components, deserving protection from academic dissection. This balanced approach respected indigenous knowledge sovereignty while permitting appropriate information preservation, serving practical boundary interaction purposes. The following weeks provided integration period, allowing extraordinary experience incorporation within existing research frameworks without forced categorization exceeding evidence parameters. The anthropologist contributed valuable academic perspective, documenting historical ceremonial practices, now confirmed through direct observation. Catherine updated witness account database with appropriately anonymized documentation, preserving experience details while respecting privacy considerations. Joseph facilitated connection with additional indigenous knowledge keepers, maintaining parallel traditions at different regional boundary locations. My contribution focused on geographical documentation establishing correlation between boundary manifestation locations and watershed system interconnections. The resulting mapping revealed network patterns previously unrecognized through isolated location analysis, suggesting distributed consciousness manifesting through connected water systems rather than independent phenomena occurring at separate locations. This perspective transformed understanding from individual entity encounters to interconnected boundary system maintenance functioning throughout regional ecosystem. Spring approached with gradual temperature increase releasing frozen waterways through natural seasonal transition. Monitoring systems established at Sentinel Falls documented normal flow resumption without unusual incident patterns, suggesting successful boundary maintenance through winter interruption period. Continued observation throughout subsequent seasons confirmed significant reduction in visitor disorientation incidents compared with statistical predictions based on extended freezing duration. The solstice ceremony represented turning point in boundary phenomena research, moving beyond documentation of individual experiences toward practical application, preserving balanced relationship between different aspects of reality, sharing geographical space, while maintaining necessary separation. The watching presence continues its ancient observation role throughout connected waterway systems, occasionally manifesting when appropriate conditions align with necessary communication requirements. What watches from falling water maintains boundaries established before human presence, while adapting to changing circumstances affecting physical manifestation mediums. Those encountering its presence may interpret through various conceptual frameworks, while sharing common practical interaction protocols, ensuring appropriate relationship maintenance despite theoretical differences. The ceremonial acknowledgement tradition continues through adaptive contemporary forms, respecting indigenous wisdom, while incorporating broader participation when appropriate circumstances require expanded recognition. Reality contains multiple simultaneous truths operating at different perception levels without contradiction. Scientific understanding describing physical processes, traditional wisdom, preserving relationship knowledge, contemporary documentation, establishing practical interaction protocols. These approaches coexist within expanded awareness, embracing partial understanding while acknowledging inherent limitations within any single interpretive framework. The watcher continues observing from boundaries between worlds requiring separation, while occasionally permitting necessary interaction under appropriate conditions. Those encountering its manifestations participate in ancient relationship patterns, extending beyond individual experience into broader, interconnected systems, maintaining balanced existence across multiple reality aspects, sharing physical geography, while occupying different perceptual dimensions. 2 years have passed since the winter solstice ceremony at Sentinel Falls. During this period, significant changes occurred in both external circumstances and personal understanding regarding boundary phenomena associated with waterfall locations throughout Ridgemont National Park and surrounding watershed systems. The collaborative research project initiated through Catherine's witness documentation and my geographical analysis has expanded into formally structured study involving multiple disciplines, each contributing valuable perspective while respecting inherent limitations within individual methodological frameworks. The anthropologists secured modest university funding supporting cultural practice documentation, specifically addressing traditional ceremonial approaches to boundary locations. Joseph facilitated appropriate indigenous participation, ensuring research respected cultural protocols while benefiting from traditional knowledge, preserved through generations of careful transmission. My own involvement evolved from individual researcher seeking personal understanding toward coordination role facilitating communication between diverse participants approaching common phenomena through different conceptual frameworks. This position required careful balance between academic rigor, practical application, and appropriate respect for knowledge systems operating beyond conventional scientific categorization schemes. Seasonal ceremonies now occur at major boundary locations throughout the regional watershed system, conducted through collaborative participation involving indigenous knowledge keepers, academic observers, and selected individuals demonstrating appropriate relationship capacity through previous boundary encounters. These gatherings follow traditional timing, corresponding with critical seasonal transitions, winter and summer solstices, spring and autumn equinoxes, when boundary conditions naturally fluctuate through astronomical and meteorological influences. Documentation continues through carefully designed protocols respecting ceremonial privacy, while preserving practical information benefiting broader understanding. The resulting knowledge base expands steadily through consistent observation rather than dramatic revelation. Incremental understanding accumulating through patient documentation across multiple seasons and locations rather than spectacular individual incidents. Personal relationship with Ridgemont National Park has achieved comfortable equilibrium between ordinary appreciation and extraordinary awareness. Regular hiking throughout the park's extensive trail system continues providing physical exercise and psychological refreshment without requiring constant boundary awareness. Periodic participation in ceremonial gatherings maintains appropriate acknowledgement of watching presence without demanding continuous engagement beyond necessary interaction points. Sentinel Falls remains significant location within this evolving understanding, not through avoidance or fearful respect, but appropriate recognition of its function within larger interconnected system. Visits occur regularly without dramatic manifestations or unusual experiences disrupting normal wilderness appreciation. The watching presence continues its observation role without requiring acknowledgement beyond established ceremonial patterns, maintaining appropriate boundary relationship. The knife offered during initial encounter remains unrecovered, continuing its transition from personal possession to boundary exchange token through processes transcending conventional physical understanding. This exchange represents appropriate cost for knowledge gained rather than sacrifice requiring replacement or compensation. Some gifts establish relationships continuing beyond initial transaction, creating ongoing connections maintained through mutual recognition rather than repeated material exchange. Catherine's documentation project continues expanding through carefully verified witness accounts collected through increasingly sophisticated interview protocols, differentiating genuine boundary encounters from imagination or exaggeration. The resulting database provides valuable resource supporting individuals experiencing similar phenomena without established conceptual frameworks adequately explaining their experiences. This practical approach offers validation without requiring theoretical acceptance beyond individual comfort zones. Joseph's contribution extends beyond ceremonial leadership to include educational outreach within appropriate indigenous contexts, preserving traditional knowledge while adapting transmission methods addressing contemporary circumstances. Young community members receive guidance regarding boundary interaction protocols through carefully structured teaching, combining traditional wisdom with practical application relevant to modern wilderness experiences. This knowledge transfer ensures cultural continuity while acknowledging changed circumstances surrounding ancestral territories, now designated as public parklands. The anthropologist's academic contribution provides valuable documentation preserving ceremonial practices through appropriate scholarly frameworks, respecting indigenous knowledge sovereignty. His published articles maintain careful balance between academic rigor and cultural respect, providing sufficient documentation supporting scholarly validity while avoiding exploitative exposure of ceremonial elements requiring protection from inappropriate dissemination. This work establishes important precedent regarding responsible academic engagement with indigenous knowledge systems. My own perspective continues evolving through this ongoing collaborative experience. Academic training initially approached boundary phenomena as objects requiring classification within established theoretical frameworks, categorizing experiences according to predetermined schemas, validating understanding through familiar terminology. This approach gradually transformed toward relationship-based understanding, resembling indigenous perspectives, respecting phenomena as participants within mutual interaction systems, rather than passive subjects requiring external explanation. The watching presence extending throughout watershed systems maintains ancient patterns predating human categorization schemes, while adapting to changed circumstances affecting traditional interaction methods. Whether interpreted as spiritual entity, interdimensional consciousness, or emergent natural phenomenon within expanded ecosystem understanding, practical interaction protocols remain consistently effective across diverse conceptual frameworks. This pragmatic functionality transcends theoretical disagreements regarding ultimate classification or explanation. Personal understanding continues developing through combined approaches: scientific methodology documenting observable patterns, traditional wisdom preserving relationship knowledge, and direct experience providing experiential understanding, transcending intellectual categorization. These complementary perspectives operate simultaneously rather than competitively, each contributing valuable dimension toward comprehensive understanding exceeding limitations inherent within individual approaches. Regular visits to Sentinel Falls now occur without expectation or apprehension, simply acknowledging location significance within larger system while appreciating natural beauty through ordinary perception. The watching presence continues observation without requiring special acknowledgement beyond established ceremonial patterns, maintaining appropriate boundary recognition. This normalized relationship preserves extraordinary awareness within ordinary experience without demanding continuous conscious engagement, disrupting natural wilderness appreciation. Last autumn, during regular hiking expedition along familiar trails, I encountered unexpected evidence of continued boundary presence beyond ceremonial contexts. Photography documenting seasonal foliage captured subtle manifestation visible only during later review. Familiar darkness partially visible between distant trees, positioned observing rather than approaching, maintaining appropriate separation while acknowledging mutual recognition through momentary presence within recordable spectrum. This casual acknowledgement, without dramatic manifestation, represented evolved relationship transcending initial encounter intensity, comfortable coexistence replacing unsettling discovery through established mutual understanding. The watching presence continues fulfilling ancient observation role while permitting occasional recognition, confirming continued relationship without demanding extraordinary interaction, disrupting normal boundary maintenance. The knife remains wherever exchanges occur between different aspects of reality, physical object transitioning from human ownership to boundary token through processes operating beyond conventional understanding. Its continued absence represents appropriate cost for knowledge gained through extraordinary experience, rather than loss requiring replacement. Some exchanges continue generating value beyond initial transaction, creating ongoing relationship maintained through mutual recognition rather than repeated material transfers. What watches from falling water continues its patient vigil throughout interconnected watershed systems, maintaining boundaries established before human categorization schemes, while adapting to changed circumstances affecting traditional interaction patterns. Those encountering its manifestations may interpret through diverse conceptual frameworks while sharing common practical understanding regarding appropriate relationship maintenance, transcending theoretical differences. Reality contains multiple simultaneous truths, operating at different perception levels without contradiction. Scientific understanding describing physical processes, traditional wisdom preserving relationship knowledge, contemporary documentation establishing practical interaction protocols. These approaches coexist within expanded awareness, embracing partial understanding, while acknowledging inherent limitations within any single interpretive framework. The watcher remains, not supernatural entity demanding worship, nor psychological projection requiring therapeutic intervention, nor undiscovered natural phenomenon awaiting scientific classification. Its existence transcends categorical limitations while operating according to consistent patterns, discernible through patient observation and respectful interaction. Some phenomena remain appropriately mysterious, while simultaneously permitting practical relationship development through accumulated experience rather than comprehensive explanation. Ridgemont National Park contains both ordinary natural beauty accessible through conventional perception and extraordinary boundary phenomena available to appropriately attuned awareness. Both realities coexist without contradiction or conflict, parallel experiences available according to individual perception rather than competing interpretations requiring selection between mutually exclusive alternatives. The seasons continue their eternal cycle at Sentinel Falls, water flowing freely during warmer months, freezing into crystalline formations during winter extremes, returning to liquid movement through spring thaw. Throughout these physical transformations, the watching presence maintains consistent observation role, sometimes visible through direct manifestation, occasionally perceptible through subtle awareness modification, always present beyond conventional perception through boundary maintenance functions predating human presence in these ancient landscapes. Some boundaries deserve respect through appropriate acknowledgement rather than aggressive crossing. Some knowledge affects perception permanently, without providing definitive explanation. Some encounters conclude properly through mutual recognition rather than enforced categorization. These lessons remain whether the watcher manifests as objective entity or symbolic representation of transitional awareness, where different aspects of reality meet like water flowing between levels, creating spaces where observation continues from perspectives beyond ordinary understanding.